Good morning, everybody. It has just gone 10 a.m. on Wednesday, 27th of March, 2024. Today we continue with the public inquiry into the application for Garvary Wind Farm. My name is Nick Smith. I am a reporter working for Scottish Government's Planning and Environmental Appeals Division, DPEA. I have been appointed by Scottish ministers to prepare a report and recommendations for them about whether or not the proposed Garvary Wind Farm should be approved. I made a series of points in my opening remarks on Monday, and I don't intend to repeat all of those, but I do need to run through some housekeeping and other matters, so I'll just do those first. All inquiry and hearing sessions pertaining to this case are being broadcast live on the internet for the public to follow, so today is being broadcast live. Sadly, we weren't able to do that yesterday because of connection issues, but I'm advised that yesterday's proceedings will be uploaded in the coming days, so they will be capable of viewing then. All recordings, the material will be recorded and stored as part of DPA's webcast archive and will be capable of repeated viewing. By participating in these virtual sessions, participants are consenting to being filmed and to the use and storage of those images and sound recordings and any information pertaining to them contained in those for webcasting and training purposes and for the purpose of keeping historical records and making those records available to the public. Further details of that can be found in the DPA privacy notice on the relevant part of the gov.scot website. And for data protection and privacy reasons, I would request that participants don't take any photographs or other recordings of their own during the session unless those being photographed or recorded have consented to that. There's a fire register doing the rounds, so if you haven't had a chance to autograph that, then I'd be grateful if you could. If the fire alarm goes off, I think it will be real, so we need to make our way to the nearest exit, of which there are several in the room, and the emergency rally point is just outside in the car parking area. I think by now everyone knows that the kitchen and toilet facilities are just behind me in the hall, so you can access those. As I've said on each of the days, there's a lot of equipment and cabling around, so do please be aware of that when you're moving about the room. I think everything's taped down, but nevertheless, please be aware of trip hazards. And if any participant is taken ill during the proceedings, we'll adjourn until medical attention is sought and we'll liaise about when to reconvene. Just a reminder about being courteous and respectful to one another. Of course, everybody has different points of view and I need to be able to hear what everybody has to say. And those principles of courtesy and respect extend beyond the confines of this room, and I would request that people who are using social media continue to show the same courtesy and respect in their use of that. Now, today we are holding two hearing sessions. The first to discuss policy and the second to discuss draft conditions. Now, I had originally intended both of those to be on separate days, but the participants had advised they were confident that the matters could be covered in one day, and I agreed. So those two agendas that were circulated a few weeks ago are both going to be covered today. And if it happens that we don't get through all of the contents today, then we have tomorrow available to us, although I suspect we will manage to get through the contents of the agendas today. If you're in the public seating area, there's some copies of the agendas there, so you can follow those at your leisure. The policy one is marked up with a number 1 at the top, so that's obviously the first one we'll be discussing today, and the draft conditions has a number 2 at the top, so you can make out which is which fairly easily. The sessions today are less formal than we've seen over the last couple of days. They'll take the form of a structured roundtable discussion chaired by me. I will invite one of the parties to start on each of the respective matters. We'll have some discussion backwards and forwards between the parties. I will ask various questions, and then once we get to the close of each item, I will invite the applicant to close. As has been the case before, I will look to take a break perhaps about 11:30. We'll see how we're doing and whereabouts things are. I'm also aware this morning I have had forwarded to me by the office a submission of a new document, CD 16.006, which I understand to be a revised draft conditions schedule that the applicant and the council have put together. And in a moment, once I've asked the parties to introduce themselves, I'll then give some time for the applicant to advise me on what that is, and we'll have a brief discussion on that. I suspect we might find ourselves straying to some of the items that are covered by the agendas. I think what I'd probably like to do is just run through the agendas anyway, and that gives us a structured manner by which to explain anything that's come about from that. And for anybody who's following this, that will allow them to follow it. So there'll be an opportunity for us to do that in just a few moments. But with the exception of those matters, and just before I ask the parties to introduce themselves, are there any queries or any points for me this morning besides that? No. Okay. I'll invite the applicant first to introduce themselves and their team for the day, and then I'll ask the council to do the same, and then once we've done that, we'll have a discussion on 1606. So the applicant, please.
Thanks, sir. Good morning. Marcus Trinick, King's Counsel, instructed by Nicola Martin, partner in Wright Johnson Mackenzie, who's at the end of the table. Today, in the hearing session, David Bell Planning, who sits to my right, will be the principal speaker. I may come in occasionally, but I'll try not to. That's it for the policy hearing session. For the conditions hearing session, I will be principally dealing with matters. I've got Mr. Baird of Coriolis to my left, who will also be speaking.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Finlay for the council, please.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Good morning. My name is James Finlay, King's Counsel, and I have to my right Mark Fitzpatrick, who you have heard from already. We're dealing with matters slightly differently. In terms of the policy agenda, we'll both be making submissions. Mr. Fitzpatrick dealing primarily with items 1 and 3, and myself primarily with items 2 and 4. On the conditions session, Mr. Fitzpatrick will be taking the lead, and I will be saying little, if anything, but no doubt we'll end up saying something. Thank you.
Thank you both. Let's, before we move into the agenda then, I mentioned obviously a moment ago about the new document CD 16006, so I'll invite the applicant, Mr. Trinick, just to say a little bit about that. As I say, not necessarily going into the detail just now, because I think we'll find ourselves doing that through the agenda, but if you can just explain and give everybody a synopsis of what that is and the nature of it and how it's come about, and once you've done that, I'll invite Mr. Finlay to respond.
Yes, thanks. CD 16.5 was the version addressed, I think, in your agenda. Since that version, there have been further discussions between the applicant and Highland Council, particularly in relation to noise, and you've heard about that already. Also in relation to the construction environmental management plan, the traffic management plan, and one or two other things which will become clear. And it became apparent that things have moved on quite a bit since 16.5. So even though, with apologies, you had to receive it so late, it was thought worthwhile producing and circulating 16.6, because that incorporates the latest state of play as between the applicant and Highland Council. It may make a bit of a mess of your agenda in some places, and I apologise for that, but it is the up-to-date position.
Okay. Thank you for that. Mr. Finlay, did you want to respond?
Yes, I echo what Mr. Trinick has said, and indeed, in part the discussions occurred in response to receipt of your agenda. So your agenda prompted further discussions on various issues, and which led to no doubt discussions on other issues as well. That explains why it has come in later on in the day, because it was a response to your agenda and an intention to assist the smooth running of the inquiry. I would have imagined that there will be sufficient time in the day that if you need more time to assimilate that document before we start on the conditions session, that will be easily capable of being accommodated.
Thank you both. Yes, I've had a glance through this morning, and it may well be that that's a helpful thing. And I think once we've got through the first agenda, I think I may well decide whether it's helpful for me to take a longer break, so I've just got time to look through that. Mr. Trinick, sorry, you want to come back?
We have a single-sided hard copy for you if you'd like it.
And you're content for me to have that?
Anything that helps you.
I'm content to accept the document electronically, which has been submitted to me anyway, so I understand what you're giving me now is simply a paper copy of what's already been given. Thank you. So both of you are content. This is a paper copy of the electronic thing you've both already agreed to submit to me, so I'm not being given a different document, am I? I'm being given the document.
That is 16.6.
I haven't checked it, but I'll accept that Mr. Trinick is not passing you something untoward. And I should have just added this caveat. 16.6 was helpfully prepared by the applicants last night. We've checked through it. I'm not aware of any issues with its content, but if they do arise, they will arise during the session. But I just put that caveat in, not that I'm aware of any at this stage, but it is clearly a bona fide attempt to summarise the position between the parties.
Okay, I'm content that I understand matters, so that's helpful. Thank you, both of you. If there's nothing further on that, then I'm happy to proceed to the policy agenda just now, which, if you're following in the public gallery, is the one with the number 1 on the top of it. So that is the agenda for policy. There are 3 items. So what I'll do is I'll read through each item and then we'll have a discussion about the respective matters. And I think at the end of that, then each one will invite the applicant to close. So I'll just read through this first. So item 1, MPF 4, policy 3, biodiversity, CD 74. Electronic pages 38 and 39. So MPF policy 3A refers to enhancement of biodiversity, including restoring degraded habitats. MPF 4 policy 3B refers to conserve, restore and enhance biodiversity, including nature networks so they are in a demonstrably better state than without intervention. MPF 4 policy 3B part 4 includes the phrase significant biodiversity enhancements are provided in addition to any proposed mitigation. Nature Scott's document advising on peatland, carbon-rich soils and priority peatland habitats in development management, updated November 2023, CD 1008. I'm just going to pause there actually because I think the CD 108 that's in the core document library might well be the June version. If I'm mistaken, I'm happy to be told. But if it is the June version, would it be possible to submit the updated November version, please? Thank you. That document was referenced by RSPB Scotland and Nature Scott in their responses to the updated cumulative landscape and visual impact assessment in December last year, January this year. And appears to state that the direct and indirect loss of peatland, including priority peatland habitat, would best be mitigated, and that's my emphasis there, by restoring an area of peatland much greater than that which is predicted to be lost. And Nature Scott's above document also states, in addition, MPF 4 Policy 3 introduced a new requirement that proposals for national or major development or for EIA development need to demonstrate that significant biodiversity enhancements are provided in addition to any proposed mitigation, and typical measures include tree and scrub removal, raising the water level and revegetating bare peat by blocking drains, installing dams, reprofiling peat hags, peat pan restoration, and this should be considered in accordance with the Peatland Action Technical Compendium, end quotes. And therefore, what I'm wishing to understand is what is the difference between mitigation and enhancement in the context of NPF 4 Policy 3, and can some things perform both functions or only one function? So I'll invite the applicant first to respond on that, and then I'll bring the council in afterwards.
Thanks, sir. Good morning. In answering the question, I think the first high-level comment I would make is that the terms are not new ones for the planning system to deal with insofar as mitigation and enhancement. I'll come on specifically to Policy 3, but the current guidance is helpful There's a relatively historic document, Planning Advice Note 13 on EIA, which refers to the mitigation hierarchy, which is the same as that referred to in the November guidance. So it's not a new concept for EIA or for planning to deal with. One of the guidance documents that you don't refer to in the preamble to the questions is the Scottish Government Draft Planning Guidance on Biodiversity, which is November 23, it's CD 010.011. And I refer to it in my hearing statement at paragraph 4.9.13. And it refers to the mitigation hierarchy on page 10, paragraph 3.3.
My apologies, could you just remind me of that paragraph?
So 3.3, paragraph 3.3 in the guidance document.
Sorry, 3.3 in the guidance document, but in your report, in your hearing statement.
In my hearing statement, it's at paragraph 4.9.13.
I found that. My apologies.
Yep.
Just continue when you're ready.
So in the guidance document itself, page 10, paragraph 3.3, it states the mitigation hierarchy indicates the order in which the impacts of development should be considered and addressed, the first to avoid, then minimise, restore and offset. And it says potential negative effects should be mitigated in line with the mitigation hierarchy prior to identifying enhancements. So enhancements is seen as distinct from mitigation, and that's clear in the NPF4 policy. This guidance note also refers to policy 3B, and there is a specific section on it from page 16, and it goes into some detail on applying policy 3B.
Are we in the guidance just now?
In the Scottish Government draft guidance.
Sorry, just bear with me a second. Let me locate where we are.
So,
It's CD 1011, isn't it?
yeah.
Had it open and then I've lost it. And remind me of that page, please.
Page 16, from paragraph 4.6.
I'm there, yep.
So I'm not going to go through, it's quite detailed, but some of the key points I would say are it reiterates the need to demonstrate that through the planning application, the ways in which biodiversity will be left in a demonstrably better state. It makes the point at 4.6 that NPF4 does not specify or require a particular assessment approach or methodology. And at 4.7 it says assessment may be qualitative or quantitative. So there's flexibility for an applicant to come forward with measurements or more qualitative approaches to enhancement. I think another important point is on page 18 at paragraph 4.14, where it states it will be for the planning authority to determine whether the relevant policy criteria have been met, taking into account the circumstances of a particular proposal. And then just below that, in the same paragraph, it says the selection and design of enhancements will be a matter of judgment based on the circumstances of the individual case, taking into account a range of considerations. And then it goes on to refer to those. The first two, one is the location of the site and the opportunities it provides for enhancing biodiversity, and secondly, the character and scale of development. So that there may be situations where there's quite limited opportunity, and the guidance goes on at page 19 to refer to off-site enhancement, if there's a need to do that. But clearly, in this particular case for Garvary, there are on-site measures that are proposed, and the site has afforded particular opportunities for measures, and these are summarised in my hearing statement at 4.9.31. But just to finish and coming back to the questions, I would say whilst there is a difference between mitigation and enhancement, that depending on the circumstances of a case and a development, there may be overlap between the two. So I would say it's entirely possible for some mitigation to perform both functions, namely mitigate an impact and provide enhancement. So, for example, if it was, say, a large-scale housing or industrial development that we were dealing with, and there was a need to mitigate the visual impact through planting, structural planting, then depending on the nature of the species mix that went in there and other habitat-related activities that might go along with that, then you would deal with the mitigation of visual effect, but you would also deal with and deliver a habitat enhancement. So I think that's a theoretical example of where there would be overlap between the two, and there's the dual function is being provided.
So are you suggesting then that a given measure, and obviously you gave me an example just there, a given measure could have, I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, the thing that's coming to my mind is almost a kind of a multiple functionality. So can an action or a particular thing that has been delivered, are you saying then that it might have multiple functionality and therefore it can be used to achieve one thing, but it can then also, by its nature, achieve another, even if that wasn't a mitigatory thing, and that could be viewed as enhancement. But what you didn't seem to be saying to me in the hypothetical you gave, as I understood it at least, you seem to be saying if it's visual mitigation that you needed in that hypothetical example, then the planting would perform the visual mitigation, but it would have a knock-on effect of providing habitat in that particular example. And the habitat element, in your view, could be considered to be enhancement. So one thing, two results, I suppose, is what you seem to be saying, I thought.
That's a fair characterisation of it. And certainly planting is a popular enhancement measure at the moment, particularly where it's riparian planting, because not only will you have the trees and the habitat with that, but then if there's a river there, then providing shade to the water deals with helping fish life and so on, and that's a key issue at the moment with climate change in many rivers, and that's why riparian planting is very, very often put forward. But yes, I think that example I've provided would demonstrate the functionality outcomes can be multi or varied.
Did you want to say any more on that before I invite the Council to come back?
No, the last thing on that question was, I think we lodged a document which is a battery storage Section 36 decision called DEVILA, that's DEVILLA, and it's CD 11.37. And
do you want me to bring that up?
I can give you just some brief references to it. If so, 11.37, and in that case it was dealing with a determining issue around biodiversity and also the benefits of a development insofar it was a national development contributing to dealing with climate change in terms of Policy 11. And the ministers deal with Policy 3 biodiversity from paragraph 53 in that decision letter. But taking it quite short, paragraph 53, this is just a short quotation, the ministers acknowledge that the development is not supported by NPF4 Policy 3. The climate emergency declared by the government adds to the urgency for building projects which help achieve the government's ambitions for low carbon and renewable energy. It goes on to say that the proposed development is supported by all relevant policies in NPF with the exception of Policy 3. And then the ministers go on to say climate change will increase the risk of flooding and drought, impacting biodiversity, including not just Davila Forest, but Scotland as a whole. Climate change is the single greatest threat to Scotland's habitats. The ministers consider this justifies giving greater weight to NPF policies 1 and 11 rather than policy 3 when weighing up the support for the development. Scottish ministers conclude that when NPF is read as a whole, the support for the proposed development outweighs the lack of support from policy 3. So I think that's the first case where we have seen the ministers distribute weight amongst the policies in that way. Now, I'm not suggesting in any way that this development we're dealing with at the inquiry doesn't meet the terms of policy 3. We say it does satisfy that, but it was just to observe a recent case where greater, notwithstanding a failure against policy 3, greater weight has been placed upon policies 1 and 11.
Okay, thank you for that. Did you want to say any more before I move on? Okay, I'll invite the Council to give any remarks on that. I appreciate this wasn't a matter on which you objected, so obviously it's not something on which to invent an objection when you hadn't previously made one, but you've had a chance to listen to the various discussion there. Did you have thoughts on A, what you've heard, and B, how that would affect your answer to the questions that I've posed?
Just really to set out that I agree with Mr. Bell's summarisation for the first question between mitigation and enhancement in the context of MPF4. I would draw your attention to CD 10008. It does advise really in just...
sorry, which document is that? CD?
010.008. It does set out the ratios for mitigation, i.e. compensation of 1 to 10, and also sets out the sort of distance for the indirect impacts on peatland from the direct impacts. It sets that out at 30 metres. The enhancement section sets out a 10% additional enhancement, so it's just to draw your attention to those parts.
Sorry, can I just interrupt you there? So you refer to the ratio of 1 to 10, and obviously that was something that had been highlighted to me by the RSPB Scotland and Nature Scot in their earlier responses. And I'm clear on the matter of the ratio that forms part of the proposal on this one.
Yeah.
But when you were just advising me there, you referred to, I understood that you referred to 1 to 10 as enhancement.
Sorry,
had that been what you intended to say? Was my question?
No, sorry, 10% enhancement. Yeah.
10% enhancement. Can you direct me to the bit where you're seeing that? Sorry,
There's an enhancement section.
Whereabouts are we?
You're in the June version.
I'm in the June version. I don't have the... Let me just check it's on the website.
I think, yes, sorry, I'm on page 15, electronic page 15, I see. So there is a section, part of the bold, the first paragraph is in bold.
Yeah.
So it says for priority peatland habitats, this would mean additional restoration measures beyond those required to achieve the 1 to 10 offsetting ratio lost restored are required for enhancement. I assume we to be Nature Scot, would expect this to be in the region of an additional 10% of the baseline assessment of the extent of priority peatland. Is that what you're directing me to?
Yeah.
Okay. And can you just talk me through what it was you understood that to say?
So my understanding of the policies is that enhancement is in addition, and that's to the compensation measures, to the mitigation measures. Which I think we're in broad agreement with. Going to what Mr. Bell said about there can be overlap. There's certainly instances that I've dealt with for battery energy storage systems where, visual mitigation has been provided by planting, and which also gives the added benefit of biodiversity enhancement. I think they're two separate things, however, mitigation and enhancement when it comes to removal of peatland habitats and habitats in general.
So you appeared there to agree with Mr. Bell's point of and you recall a discussion a couple of minutes ago I was having with him where I kind of, you don't have to use my language by any means, I use the word kind of almost multifunctional. So he gave the example of visual screening, which could itself become a habitat. And therefore, one thing. You appear to be saying, if I've understood you correctly, peatland restoration is a mitigation thing. You appear to be saying peat restoration is mitigation and is not enhancement. Did I understand you correctly? And you seem to then say afterwards that you didn't think anything in relation to habitats could form both functions. It was one or the other. Did I understand that?
Yes, I think so, yes. So, like you said, mitigation should follow the hierarchy. So, avoidance, and then minimise, and then restore or compensate for habitat loss. And then, if unavoidable, offset. So, I agree with him and yourself on that.
I see. So, if I was to take Mr. Bell's, he gave us a hypothetical example with something visual. But if I was to take peatland restoration, which we've just been discussing, and for instance, if you have restored peatland, which you've told me I think is a form of mitigation, and then species find it easier and more appealing to live in, does the species finding it easier and a more opportune place to live, does that represent an enhancement in your mind, or no?
Not in the terms of MPF4, no.
So, the peatland restoration in that instance, in your view, and I appreciate you weren't objecting, you weren't saying that there was a failure of policy, but your interpretation of matters is peatland restoration doesn't constitute an enhancement, it constitutes mitigation, and if in doing that species find it easier to live on the restored peatland, that is also mitigation, that is not enhancement. Yes, by all means. You know, I'm asking some fairly academic questions here, I appreciate. So it's...
I think in the clearest terms I can put it is that if you have a certain amount of peatland restoration, then that's mitigation, and if you go over and above that, that would be enhancement.
Okay, I think I understand, because I appreciate that there wasn't disagreement between you both about the compliance with policy. I'm interested in the interpretation of the components of it, which is obviously which has been prompted to me by this. Okay, I think I understand where you're coming from. Were there any other things you wanted to say before I invite Mr. Bell to come back? I'm sure he'll want to.
Can I raise a couple of points? Just in terms of the document Mr. Bell helpfully referred you to, there is a glossary in that with definitions of mitigation and enhancement, which may assist. I don't.
So, are we talking about the draft guidance document, the CD 1011?
Yes. If one goes towards the end of that document.
I think I'm on electronic page 23.
23
has terms and definitions.
23 has enhancement, and 24 has mitigation measures and mitigation hierarchy. I was just to point those out, that they're useful definitions. And can I reiterate, I think Mr. Bell's example, not on a wind farm or peatland restoration case, does work where the same action could be mitigation and enhancement, because the mitigation is mitigating a visual aspect, but by doing that you can have a biodiversity enhancement. With peatland restoration, to reiterate what was said, depends on quantity, your peatland restoration as mitigation will be peatland restoration, because you're effectively replacing peatland that's been lost. So the biodiversity use of that, or the use of that by what will be lost will be replaced. If you go over and above that, then that can be enhancement in terms of quantity. The other matter I was just wishing to comment on, again, it's not an issue of disagreement. The De Villa case, which is CD 1137, the relevant paragraphs, I think, are 53 and 54, and I may have misheard Mr. Bell, but the paragraph he was quoting was 63. But it is a very good example of the proper approach to MPF4, which is to read it as a whole. And just because you don't comply with every aspect of it doesn't mean you're not in accordance with it as a whole. It's a fairly basic planning approach. You have to, but there you have a very good example of Scottish ministers saying that application didn't comply with policy MPF3, policy 3, but it did comply or accord overall. I endorse what Mr. Bell said about that, and it's a good example of that.
Thank you. Mr. Bell, then, did you want to come back? I understand
just a few
some points to address.
I think the last point Mr. Finlay was saying about, if you're going essentially beyond what is lost, then that can count as enhancement. I would agree with that. And that's what the applicant has set out in the Outland Habitat Management Plan, namely that there would be substantive improvement on current conditions. And in relation to the glossary of terms, they are quite helpful. The enhancement refers to, again, need to demonstrate that it will be in an overall better state. And in terms of mitigation measures, it says measures that allow an activity with a negative impact on biodiversity but reduce the impact on site by changes to the scale, design, location, process, management, and monitoring, and so on. And there are other measures, of course, such as the SEMP and the peat management plan, that are mitigation actions that will be qualifying, if you like, as aspects that will contribute to those processes, if you like.
Yes, Mr. Trinick.
So coming as well, responding to what Mr. Fitzpatrick said about some sort of biodiversity metric to secure enhancement. There's quite a lot of activity going on here. It's not simply that which he recorded. First of all, it's fair to say that the Nature-Scott June 23 guidance, CD 10.8, to which he referred, was quite a surprise. It came out without consultation. Subsequent to that, in the context of the onshore wind sector deal, which you may have heard, which was completed last October, the Scottish Government is evolving its own approach to biodiversity guidance. It may be qualitative, it may be quantitative, it may be a mixture of both. And it's set up a peatland PEAG, Peatland Advisory Group, I can't remember what the E stands for, which is established under the sector deal to bring this forward. That may well moderate what Nature-Scott have to say. That will be the definitive guidance when it comes out. Now, in that context, could you note CD 12.8, which is the applicant's response to the...
Sorry, that was CD 12.8.
12.8.
Just a moment, let me find that.
The applicant's written response to additional information 2023 representations.
This is the one dated 16th of February 2024,
correct.
Is that correct? Yeah.
And that deals not only with SEPA at paragraph 3 and 4, RSPB at 5 to 11, deals with peatland restoration at 12 onwards. It makes comments on the Nature-Scott guidance at paragraphs 12 and 13, which reflect what I've just said to you. And it goes on to make further comments you can read for yourself. In addition to that, we have a CD 7.6, if you turn to that.
This is the Chief Planner's letter, 8th of February 2023.
Correct. If you scroll down through that letter, you will get to a heading Policy 3 Biodiversity.
Yep.
To support this policy and guidance, Nature Scott previously consulted on developing with Nature Guidance to accompany Policy 3. Final version will be available shortly. We are committed to developing guidance to accompany Policy 3, recognising there is no single accepted methodology for calculating and or measuring biodiversity enhancement. We have commissioned research, that's the PEAG, to explore options for developing a biodiversity metric or other tool. It's not necessarily a quantitative metric, specifically for use in Scotland. The point being, sir, that the 10% or 10 to 1 or whatever it is ratio comes straight from the DEFRA metric, which is used in England, where the evaluation of peatland is very different to the evaluation of peatland value in Scotland. In fact, the DEFRA metric makes it very difficult to achieve enhancement in a Scottish context, which is why this new metric, or whatever it's going to be, is being developed. So that which Mr Fitzpatrick has recorded is very much an interim position, which is likely to change over the next few months, and will result in definitive guidance from the Scottish Government under the sector deal.
Thank you for that. Before I make the point I was going to make, I'll invite the Council to come back if it wants to say anything about those things.
No, I don't. I mean, the Nature Scott guidance is clearly in draft. Everything is clearly in draft at the moment. That's one of the issues parties have to face with MPF4 in a number of instances rather than circumstances. The policy exists without the necessary background guidance to go with it, so one has to do what one can.
I've got one more point to raise, but you didn't want to come back on that particularly, did you? No? Okay. So, obviously, I've quoted some stuff here, and just above the two bullet points which are at the bottom of the page, there's a bit where I've said Nature Scott's above document also states, in addition to NPF4 Policy 3, introduced a new requirement that proposals for national major development, etc., need to demonstrate that significant biodiversity enhancements are provided, and it gives some typical measures. It says tree and scrub removal, and it says raising the water level and vegetating bare peat, and you can read the rest of that paragraph. Is it correct or incorrect that the Habitats Management Plan includes those measures, whether as part and parcel of restoration of peatland? So I suppose I'm asking you, are those things there some of the mechanisms that are envisaged to enhance the peatland as part of the proposal, or are they separate to it, or are they not included, I suppose? Yeah, you're welcome to take a moment just to find the relevant bits if you want to, so I'm quite happy to.
No, it's okay, sir. I'll need someone to find the number for the updated December 2023 outline habitat management plan. Someone will give me a number in a moment. But I think it's worth looking again at document 12.8, where the applicant summarises its response to consultation responses received on the AI of December of 23, the last one. You look at paragraph 17 of the 12.8. It says, as outlined in the OHMP, the total area of direct impact on priority peatland habitat with 24.1 hectares. The OHMP proposes an area of 213 hectares of degraded priority peatland habitats will be restored and enhanced. Now, clearly, there's a point at which restoration equals mitigation becomes enhancement. I'm not going to try and define that point. There's a point at which that happens. And it's not simply based on hectareage, obviously, it's a qualitative assessment. And so it goes on within 17 and 18. That's where you find our approach to peatland.
Sorry, do you want to say that last bit again? I didn't hear the very last bit.
That is where you will find summarised the approach to peatland restoration, which is proposed to the outline habitat management plan.
Yes, I see the reference in there to its paragraph 4.1.12. Is that correct?
Sorry, say again.
In that paragraph 17 you've just described for me, it references...
17, that cross-reference to the plan.
And it references paragraph 4.1.12 of the OHMP. Yeah, okay, so that's to look at.
That's where you find it.
Could I just one very brief point in my hearing statement? paragraph 4.931, I do make the point that the measures would include improving the hydrological functioning. So that matches up with the measures that are on that agenda note in terms of raising the water level and so on. So whilst not the same wording, the same outcome is there in terms of essentially re-wetting the peat.
So to, I suppose, possibly return to the hypothetical you gave me originally, and what have you, you appear to be saying to me that the restoration of peat of itself, and correct me if I've misunderstood this, is the mitigation you're putting forward, and you've outlined why, but the consequence of that in the re-wetting example you just gave me, or that you think is consistent with the enhancement measure that is stated on the agenda that's quoted from the guidance. Have I properly understood what you're saying to me?
It will, if we go back to the earlier comments, it will be part of that multifunctional benefit, because the habitats that would thrive on that surface are clearly not there at the moment, and that degraded peat would become a rich habitat, wet peatland, peat bog.
Okay, thank you. I understand what you're saying.
So just, it's CD 123 is the OHMP, and I support what Mr Bell says. Clearly, if you re-wet, if you restore peat, you not only restore the peatland resource as a carbon sink, but you also provide a host for more species. So there's a double effect there.
Thank you for that. I'll invite the council to come back on those points if it wants to. Do you want to say anything further? No. Okay. Before we move on, did the applicant want to say any more in way of closing on that item? Are you nothing further? No. Okay. Right. Let's move on to item 2. Then I'll read through this again. I suspect over recent days we may already have our answers to some elements of this following the discussions that have happened in the landscape and visual sessions, but nevertheless I think we'll run through it to be clear. So item 2, MPF 4, policy for natural places, CD 7.4, electronic pages 40 and 41. Does the council's objection relate to MPF 4, policy for Part A and Part C only? And are the applicant's council's opinions about compliance with MPF 4 policy 4 Part A contingent solely on their respective conclusions in relation to Part C, and that's in relation to the National Scenic Area? And I won't need you to go into and repeat any of the details we've heard over the last few days, because I've had the opportunity to listen to that. So we'll kind of keep it focused at a higher level. Or are there other matters covered, and what might constitute social, environmental or economic benefits of national importance as referred to in MPF 4 policy C2. That final bullet I've read, I think we'll hold that off. We'll deal with the first two together, I think. I think I'll start with the council this time, because in the first bullet I'm directly addressing a matter of yours. So over to you. So
I'm going to lead on this one. The answer to the first question is yes, it's policy 4A and policy 4C, policy 4D, B, D, F and G don't apply, and policy 4E is just a general policy as a precautionary principle. The answer to the second question is no, it's not contingent solely in response to Part C. When you're considering whether something will have an unacceptable impact, you have to consider all the impacts. But I made it clear, I think yesterday, if not the day before, that our objection, and I used the word tipping, which apparently caused some consternation on the other side, be that as it may, what has caused the council to object, and its sole objection is on the basis of the impact on the NSA. But when you're when you're considering policy 4C, you're solely considering the NSA. But when you're considering policy 4A, which is an overarching policy, you have to consider all the impacts, and you heard some evidence on the other impacts. But I will reiterate that those other impacts of themselves would not, in the Highland Council's view of themselves, render this an unacceptable impact.
Thank you. Did you want to say any more before I...
no, I'll wait to see if I need to respond to anything.
Okay, very well. Mr Trinick.
I just, before Mr Bell comes, just seek clarification from Mr Finlay. That your first bullet was that does the Council's objection relate to 4A and 4C only? My understanding is the objection relates only to 4C. Is that correct?
I think you're welcome to answer that.
It's
yes.
semantic in a sense. An objection under 4C is, in my view, of interpretation of the document, is of itself going to engage 4A, but the objection under but the Council's, well, I don't think I can put it much clearer than I have done. The Council's objection is based on impact on the national scenic area. Whilst there are other adverse impacts, they do not render this an unacceptable location. What renders it an unacceptable location is the additional impacts caused, the additional negative impacts on the national scenic area.
So if I understand you correctly, then the Council's objection, which we've heard about over recent days, is triggered by its concerns about the NSA. That, in your view, triggers 4C, and by virtue of it triggering 4C, it also triggers 4A, which you seem to be saying is broader, and there are other things that might be encapsulated by that, but you don't consider them to be unacceptable. It's only the NSA bit that triggers 4A by virtue of triggering 4C. Is that?
Almost. It's my fault for not making myself clear, and I will return to this in our closing submissions so that Mr Trinick has a considered position to respond to in his closing submissions. When a decision maker is considering whether something has an unacceptable impact, it has to consider all impacts, all negative impacts. But what renders this, and I shall use the word tip, or what changes this from having negative impacts which might be acceptable to negative impacts which are unacceptable, looking at the totality of those impacts, is the addition into the balance of the negative impacts on the NSA.
Thank you for that. Mr Trinick, then, did you want to come back? I think that clarifies it. I'll wait and see in the closing submissions, but if I phrase it this way, if the NSA was not there and we were simply looking at landscape and visual effects, then it would seem to me there would not be a council objection under 4A, because your only objection does relate to the NSA.
Okay, do you want to say that?
Absolutely, that's absolutely our position. But once having objected, our point is that you cannot then ignore the other negative impacts when you're considering 4A. Okay,
Mr Trinick, sorry, did you come back just now? I missed.
I understand what Mr Finlay is saying. Clearly, whatever position Highland Council take, you have to report on 4A as well as 4C.
Thank you for that. Did the applicant want to say any more? And I think, Mr Bell, you were going to come in.
Just very briefly, I think from a practising planner's perspective, I would say 4A is very similar to what we had in SPP, so we're familiar with that exact phrase, and it just requires a judgment on acceptability of any impact on the environment. So in some respects, all the other parts of Policy 4 that flow after Part A are in a way a sort of subset of that catch-all environmental judgment that's required. And clearly one needs to read the policy as a whole and then NPF4 as a whole. So from the applicant's perspective, all of the environmental impacts would be referred to in that, and the position is that the impacts would be acceptable on the natural environment.
Thank you. Did you have anything further to respond?
No, I think Mr Bell put it very well, and that's why 4A is engaged.
Okay, if people are content, then we'll move on to that third bullet under item 2 then. So what might constitute social, environmental or economic benefits of national importance that are referred to in Policy 4C Part 2? And I'll just find the right bit. So C Part 2 says any significant adverse effects on the qualities for which the area has been designated are clearly outweighed by social, environmental or economic benefits of national importance, this being one of 2 points set for consideration under Part C. I'll invite the Council to go first on this one, bearing in mind it relates to the objection. I think you make reference to those 3 parameters in your objection, as I'm happy for you to correct me if I've misread that. But I'd be interested in the factors, in what might constitute those benefits to your mind.
So I would say that in terms of the way the question is drawn, it's very wide. And so just for way of example, if one was looking at housing development in the countryside, then the social benefits would be entirely different. If one's looking at a wind farm, so answering your question in the context...
Yes, which we are, of course. So,
yes, in the context of a wind farm, it is unlikely, and as far as I'm aware, I don't think the applicant suggests that there are social or economic benefits of national importance. So one is likely to be concentrating on the environmental benefits, and the environmental benefits are those that are spelt out at some length in Mr. Bell's statement, and over which there is no significant dispute. They are quite capable of being benefits of national importance. But can I add this, that if one looking at C2, a weighing exercise is required, and it's not a normal weighing exercise, it's a weighing exercise that requires one side of the balance to be clearly outweighed by the other. The use of the word clearly outweighed is an addition to the normal balancing exercise, and it's not, I hesitate to use the phrase tilted balance, but the terminology of something clearly outweighing something has some pedigree in planning policy, both north and south of the border. And so you're looking for something that is not just a 49-51, you're looking for something that's more like 60-40. Just to give I'm not that those are figures plucked out of the air, but you're looking for something that is not just outweighed, it's got to be clearly outweighed, and the decision maker has to give that word clearly some input into the balancing exercise. The economic benefits of a Section 36 proposal is clearly providing benefits in the realm of national importance. It's a national development. I can't quite remember the phraseology under MPF4. Whether if you get to C2 in this case, there is a clear outweighing. That clear outweighing doesn't just occur, and this is my second important point, because there are benefits of national importance. You first have to identify benefits of national importance, and then you have to weigh those against the adverse impacts and find, before you can approve or find a consistency with policy C2, that the benefits of national importance clearly outweigh the adverse effects. So to give an example of you could have one wind farm of a particular size in one location where the environmental benefits might clearly outweigh the significant adverse effects. You could have exactly the same scale of wind farm in another location, which gives rise to much greater significant adverse effects, where it might not do so.
And as I understand the nature of your objection then, and based on what you've just said, if I understood correctly, you seem to be saying that there weren't particular social or economic benefits. So is it fair to say that you are, I'm trying to think of the best words to use, you are unpersuaded that the environmental benefits outlined by the applicant in its evidence clearly outweigh the disbenefits that you believe to arise to the NSA. Is that a fair understanding?
Yes, that's a fair understanding. Yeah, if one gets beyond integrity, then yes, because that weighing exercise doesn't come under C1, obviously.
Okay. Did you want to say any more before I invite you
No,
up?
I'm happy to respond.
Very well. Mr. Trunick. Mr. Bell, my apologies.
Thanks, sir. Yes, I'll cover it. In terms of the benefits that result from a national development, the applicant's position is that the benefits would be of national importance. And in confirming that and supporting that position, I would like to just refer briefly to the Narrachan Section 36 decision, which from the Scottish Ministers dated CD reference 011.052. That's the PLI report, and the decision letter itself is 011.050, and it's the decision letter that I think is most helpful.
Just a moment then, let me find that and give everybody else time to find that. 1150 for the decision notice and 1152 for the PLI report.
So
did you want me to get them both?
1150, the decision letter of ministers, go to. Before doing so, just in terms of policy 4C, I know you haven't asked about the construct of the policy. Mr. Finlay's commented on some aspect of it, that there's two limbs to that policy. And he commented that the balancing reference is in the second limb and not the first limb. But what I think is helpful in understanding how you would apply that policy, in the Nature Scott guidance note on legislative and policy framework for national parks and national scenic areas, I think it was referred to in the last couple of days, CD 007.008. It is quite helpful.
Do you want to go into that?
Yes, please.
Let me just bring it up then.
Paragraph 10.
CD 78, and I'm sorry, paragraph 10. Just a moment then.
Where Nature Scott...
2 seconds. Sorry, I need to find it. CD 78. And paragraph 10, you said. That's got a series of bullets after it.
Yes, so Nature Scott give us some guidance on how to examine the two limbs of the policy. And at paragraph 10, they say this policy applies to any development affecting a national park or national scenic area, whether it falls within or out with it. And clearly we would be out with it. The two limbs provide alternative tests, although in practice it is often the possible failure of the first that prompts consideration of the second. So in examining the matter of failure of integrity, you would need inevitably to look at the effect on special qualities, and that clearly brings in the balancing consideration in the second limb of the policy. So in terms of Narrachan, it's at paragraph 261 of it's actually the PLI report.
Sorry, so that's 1152,
So
is it?
Yes.
Just bear with me a moment. Right.
So paragraph 261, if you let me know when you're there.
Just a moment. Right, I'm in the document. Paragraph
261.
261. Just a moment. This is the first paragraph in overall conclusions.
Yep.
Correct, right in there.
So the reporter says, it is clear there is now increased support within national policy and guidance for onshore wind in order to meet net zero ambitions and address climate and nature crises. This proposal would make a valuable contribution, now that's 72 megawatts in that development, towards meeting national and UK renewable energy targets, tackling climate change and achieving net zero. Now we know that tackling climate change and achieving net zero is not just environmental benefits, it's societal benefits and economic benefits as well. So Mr. Finlay was casting some doubt on whether there could be social and economic benefits. I would say that there would be. And we can look at the onshore wind policy statement and other documents to support that proposition if necessary. But
Could I just interrupt there, just to assist, I hope?
Well, I'd quite like to hear what he's got. You're welcome to come back in just a moment. I'd quite like Mr. Bell to finish what he was saying, and then if you make a note, then I'll be happy to invite you to come back in.
Yeah, I'm nearly finished this part. So just to finish the quote, it's after net zero, it says, in particular, the development would assist in the mission-critical delivery of onshore wind towards the Scottish Government's target of 20 gigawatts of installed onshore capacity by 2030. As a proposal having national development status, these benefits are of national importance. So I think that is the key reference. That's the reporter stating, because it's national development status, the benefits are of national importance.
Did you want to say more before I invite Mr.
Yes, just briefly.
Yes.
The issue in this case turned on the impact of nighttime impacts. Both the ministers and the reporter were content about the daytime effects of the development in relation to the NSA. It was only the minister's position that they would not accept a condition to deal with the ADLS system for aviation lighting mitigation, because they took the view that that would not be realisable within 5 years of our consent. I think also an important factor to recognise in that Narrachan case was that there was a Nature Scot objection in relation to the NSA. That's very different to the case here, where Nature Scot have said, and this is document in their response to Garvary, CD 0408, that, just a brief quote, due to the efforts made by the applicant to mitigate significant effects and the relatively limited locations where these effects would be experienced, we advise the amended proposal will not have an adverse effect on the integrity of the NSA or the objectives of designation. Now, the ministers did not disagree with the reporter's conclusion. It's only on the matter of the aviation lighting condition that they took issue with. The last point I would make, in terms of the scale of benefits for the calibration point about different scales of wind farm, the Narrachan scheme was 72 megawatts. Here we're dealing with 144 megawatts.
Need to draw attention to that paragraph at 118.
And yes, the last reference I would make is that in the Scottish Minister's decision letter at paragraph 118.
Is that 1150?
Sorry, this is CD 1150. This is the Minister's decision on the Narrachan case.
Yeah.
And, sorry, the paragraph was?
It's 118. So
118.
they took the view that they did not consider that the social, environmental or economic benefits of the development can be construed as significant or nationally important to the extent that they clearly outweigh the significant adverse effects on the special qualities for which the North Arran NSA has been designated. And that was in relation to the nighttime impacts that they considered could not be mitigated.
I'm just noticing in the document that you've just referred me to, there is electronic highlighting in it, and paragraph 118 is highlighted. Can I just confirm that's your highlighting? I'm assuming it's not Scottish Minister's highlighting.
I'm afraid that's applicant highlighting.
That's understood. Yes, I wasn't aware of the convention of Scottish Ministers highlighting anything particular, so I suspected it was your own. That's okay, I understand what that is. Did you want to say any more before I invite the Council to come back? Okay. Mr Finlay, there was a matter that you wanted to respond to, I realise, that was made slightly earlier, but you've heard a little bit more since as well, so I'd be very happy for you to respond on those matters as well.
Yes, just the first point, I don't want to be any misunderstanding. There are social and economic benefits. The point I was making is that, in our view, they don't reach the level themselves of being of national importance. What is going to tip this proposal into having potential and indeed probably actual benefits of national importance are its environmental benefits. There will be social and economic benefits, but it's the emphasis on the environmental benefits, and that's the reason why I concentrated on environmental benefits. So that's the first point. The second point to respond, if I can go to document CD 7078, I'm ignoring the zeros for this purpose, which is the draft guidance, and Mr. Bell took you to paragraph 10. It may just be assistance, and I'm sure you'd read it anyway. Paragraph 12 makes it clear that the second limb of the test requires consideration of a wider set of matters as well as natural heritage. So it's making it clear that there are two quite different tests. And it goes on. The third point I'd like to make is that, and by reference to your reference to our grounds of objection, there may be two balancing acts in this case. If one was considering policy 4C2, there is a requirement to be clearly outweighed by social, environmental, economic benefits. But if there was a failure with 4C1, there would still be an overall balancing exercise, ignoring for a moment that this is a Section 36 case. If this was a planning case, you might find that there was conflict with the development plan, but material considerations might indicate otherwise. Those material indications that might indicate otherwise would include the significant environmental benefits that this proposal would bring. And coming back to Highland Council's reason for refusal, they make it clear that there is an impact on the special qualities. It also makes it clear that the overall integrity would be compromised. And when it goes on to say they haven't been outweighed by social, environmental or economic benefits of national importance, that part of that sentence is equally applicable to the overall balancing exercise, and there would be a similar balancing exercise in the Section 36 case as the specific balancing exercise that it would be required for if you were in policy 4C2 territory. So again, you first of all decide whether the proposal accords to the development plan or not, and then you have to look at material considerations which might indicate otherwise. In a planning case, and I reiterate that this is not a planning case, the provisions in Section 25 don't apply, but similar considerations would apply in a Section 36 case. If there was a finding of conflict with the development plan, there could still be other reasons to grant a Section 36 proposal. Maybe need to be very significant to outweigh the conflict with the development plan, but that would be a matter for the decision maker. Finally, can I go to the Narracon decision and the I think my own friend Mr. Bell, took you to the report to begin with at paragraphs 251 and 252. And there's nothing
Sorry, just give me a moment to locate. Do I need to locate that, or are you just making a general point? Or?
I think on reflection, there's nothing that I specifically need to respond to in those paragraphs. In the Minister's decision, just to provide part of the background, paragraph 61 on electronic page 11 summarises the conclusion of the reporter as to significant daytime visual effects, that there will be sufficient, and they go beyond what may be considered as localised. but that's part of the story. Then at paragraph 70, there's an interim conclusion on the lighting impacts, which would be significant. Then in paragraph 75, the reporter's conclusion that is recorded that the daytime significant visual and cumulative effects will not be sufficient to constitute an evident and material change to the SQs of the North Arran NSA. So notwithstanding there were significant impacts on it, it wouldn't be sufficient to constitute that of itself. Paragraph 76 goes on to make the point that it's the nighttime impacts which would undermine that SQ. And clearly that's very fact-specific, that case. And then there's an agreement with the overall conclusion in paragraph 77 that those nighttime impacts would have significant effects and would undermine the integrity and objectives of the designation. So when one comes to read the final balancing act, you're in policy 4C1 territory rather than policy 4C2 territory, as I understand it. Then I think the conclusions are picked up in two parts. First would be, I would take you to, would be paragraph 4 to paragraph 106, where there's reference to the test in policy 4C2 and the fact that there could be mitigation. There's then further consideration of that, and then the next paragraph I'd take you to is para 110, where the Scottish ministers consider the proposed development is contrary to MPF policy 4C1, just to reiterate the point I was making for the reasons that they there set out. They then reached their overall conclusions in the paragraphs, I think, primarily beginning at 113, and then set out their determination in that paragraph, and then 115, and I think it was 118 that was highlighted in your version, where, particularly in 118, they're doing the second stage balancing exercise that I was alluding to earlier, where you have a conflict with policy 4C1, but they're balancing those with the benefits and finding that that balance remained in favour of refusal. So I don't disagree with Mr. Bell's, what Mr. Bell takes from it, but it may be of assistance to you to have that framework. So the overall decision was a policy 4C1 decision, and then there was an overall balancing exercise at the end. So slightly long-windedly, those are my responses to Mr. Bell's submissions.
Okay, thank you for that. Did you want to say any more? I'll invite the applicant to come back in a moment.
Perhaps I can just pick up one point. Mr. Bell wasn't here in the last 2 days. I'm not going to respond to the interpretation of Nature Scott's second non-objection, second representation. We covered that in length in the last 2 days. So I'm just making it clear I'm not accepting the full import of what he said. Obviously, the factual material is correct, and I will deal with that in closing submissions.
Okay, that's understood. Thank you. Mr. Trinick, Mr. Bell.
Mr. Trinick, I'm afraid you've got. Yeah, I don't dispute what was said. We can all read the American report and decision, and it ended up where it ended up. But I noted carefully what Mr. Finlay said at the very start, that Council did not agree that there were agreed that there would be benefits, but they wouldn't be of national importance. That's what he said. But that, coming back to Narracon, the key point is, if you look at paragraph 261 of the report, that the reporter found, as a proposal having national development status, these benefits are of national importance. Now, the nature of the benefits are site-specific, project-specific. That last statement is not. That's a generic statement. As a proposal having national development status, these benefits are of national importance. So the benefits, whatever they were at Narracombe, and I don't know what they were, I'm not interested in what they were tipped, to use a Highland Council expression in this case, they were tipped by the fact of national development status into being of national importance. That is the critical point to take from the Narracombe report. And when you turn to the decision at 118, the Scottish ministers in the last sentence do not consider that the benefits of the proposed development can be construed as significant or nationally important to the extent that they clearly outweigh the significant adverse effects. So the ministers did not disagree with the reporter that the benefits were of national importance because this was a national development. And that is the critical point to take from the Scottish minister's decision. And that applies equally, it's not fact-specific, it applies at Garvary as it did at Narracombe. The Scottish ministers, not just the reporter, they have accepted the reporter's finding that being a national development is of national, can create benefits of national importance. Now, the final point I want to make is that, of course, even beyond the balance we're looking at here in full C2, there is the further final planning balance, and Mr. Finlay has already alluded to that. And there are two elements of that final planning balance, even within PF4. There is policy 11, which at E, I think it's E, makes it clear that in considering these impacts, that is to say the impacts listed in policy 11E, significant weight will be placed on the contribution of the proposal to renewable energy generation targets and on greenhouse gas emission reduction targets. And finally, we also have the policy 1 NPF4 statement, which is, when considering all development proposals, significant weight will be given to the climate and nature crisis. So those are further balances to be applied. And there is a further, of course, final balance, which is a matter of planning judgment, which you will exercise if you feel the need to do so, quite beyond the policies in MPF4. That's my response to Mr. Finlay. Mr. Bell may have something to add, I don't know.
Mr. Bell? Okay, and there was a couple of additional matters which you might want to come back on, so I'll let you do that.
I actually don't disagree with anything Mr. Trinick said. He may, because I was responding to Mr. Bell, have taken my answer out of context. I sought to make it clear when I responded initially that Highland Council accept that the environmental benefits will be of national importance. It's only of themselves the social and economic ones which we consider are not. We are absolutely in the same territory as the decision in Narracombe, and I accept Mr. Trinick's point that because it's a proposal over 50 megawatts or has a national status, that will equate to a nationally important benefit in environmental terms. That was why I was at pains to make the point that if one is in policy 4C2 territory decision-making process, the answer isn't given just because they're of national importance. There still needs to be a weighing exercise and a clear outweighing. So I'm sorry, well, my apologies if I misled Mr. Trinick, but I completely agree with the point that he made.
I think we're at one, and in return, I clearly acknowledge, sorry, I meant the word clearly, I acknowledge that the need to clearly outweigh. That's a clear blue water test, and we acknowledge that.
So there's at least a degree of agreement. Did you want to say any more before? No? Okay. Did you want to close and say any further on that? Okay, right. That concludes item 2. I'm just looking at the clock. That's 11:24 on my clock. I think that's probably a good time to take a break. The Let's say 10 minutes. We'll come back at 11:35, please. Okay, welcome back, everybody. That's just gone 11:35. So if we can restart, please. We are partway through the policy hearing agenda. So we've done items 1 and 2. We are now on item 3, which I'll just read through for everyone's benefit. So that says MPF 4 Policy 11, Energy, CD 7.4, electronic pages 54 and 55. MPF 4 Policy E2 references the term localised when considering landscape and visual impacts. At various points of their respective evidence, the applicant and council also use the term localised in relation to landscape and or visual, including cumulative effects of the proposal. We've also discussed those at length over recent days. Even though it does not say it objects on these grounds, the council appears to wish the reporter to find that the visual effects of the proposal would be significant at more viewpoints and over a wider area than the assessment finds. Therefore, the parties appear to have conflicting views on whether or not the visual effects would be localised. As I mentioned, I've heard a great deal of those matters over the last few days, but in a moment I'd be happy for you to tell me whether that is still a correct synopsis. And the key factor that I'm interested in is what factors influence whether a visual effect can be considered to be localised or not for the purposes of MPF 4 Policy 11. And I stress, obviously, what I don't want to do is spend lots of time doing what we've just done over the last 2 days, because we've already done it. So I'd like to keep this high level and focused on that. So I will come to the council first, please. So if you can advise me, first of all, whether that synopsis is accurate, and then talk me through. I realise under cross-examination yesterday you did mention some of these things, so I'm happy for you to repeat bits, accepting that relates to this question, but I think it would be helpful to have this kind of discussion now. So over to you.
Thank you. Yes, I agree with the synopsis. In terms of factors that influence our judgment of whether a visual effect can be considered localised or not, for me it's factors such as the visible exposure of the development, including whether it's sort of platformed, for example, on higher parts of hills or plateaus, or if it's contained by landscape features and or screened. And really that would affect sort of the general geographic extent of landscape and visual impacts, and then it would be a judgment of whether they are actually significant and whether they are widespread. So these effects, as whether these effects are on sensitive receptors as well. So that can be specific landscape character types, it can be communities, landscape designations, valuable routes. It can be whether these impacts are the number of sensitive receptors these impacts are on, the geographic extent, spread and distance from the development. There can also be significant effects on less sensitive receptors, including the distance of such effects and the distribution of these effects over a geographical area, distance of significant effects from the development, and that some reporters have settled on 5 kilometres as a threshold distance. And I just want to reiterate what I said yesterday, that I don't consider that the term localised should be considered as a relative concept, i.e. relative to the size and scale of the development. I would expect that larger developments with larger, taller components would be more likely to lead to significant and non-localised effects.
You mentioned just there a series of factors, but you also talked about a distance of 5 kilometres. Could you just tell me about that, please? And can you say whether you think it's, whether you're meaning 5 kilometres from the proposal or something else? And I realise, I think you were quoting, so it might not have been your own view, but I'd appreciate if you clarify that. And I'll stop asking you extra things until you've had time to answer.
Yeah. Without specifically quoting the actual decisions, it's kind of 5 kilometres as a threshold distance from the actual development. So, 1 moment.
So I can assist in that.
Yes,
distance is clearly a factor, but it's not of itself a determining factor. So what may be right, 5 kilometres may be right in one case, may not be right in another case. I think when I was cross-examining Mr. Welsh on day one, we agreed to agree with one of his sentences in the part of his report. I can't recall the particular paragraph at the moment where he said you have to consider each application separately and reach a view on it. He dealt with localised effects in a sort of methodological approach first and then went along to consider it, but there was certainly agreement between us as to his methodological approach. And just for your note, quite right, Highland Council didn't object on the basis of they weren't localised, but in their report CD 4.2 at paragraphs 10, 12 and 11.7, they do give a view on whether the effects are localised or not, and they consider them not to be. But just to make it clear, consistent with our answer on the previous matter, we are not objecting on the basis that the impacts are not localised.
And your use of the term localised in that report of handling, ought I to read that as being definitive of your... Are you considering in that report of handling the term localised to mean it in the same way as it's meant in Policy 11? I realise we're determining what we think that means, but I take it your report of handling isn't intending to have a different definition to localised, which is your own versus that of MPF4.
The references in the report of handling are definitely are tied to localised in the context of MPF4 Policy 11E. They're specifically referred to in the same context. There are other references to localised in the document if you do a word search, which has got nothing to do with landscape and visual. But those two paragraphs specifically relate the concept of localised effects to Policy 11.
And the factors you've outlined for me are the ones that relate to those paragraphs, presumably. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Do you want to say any more before I invite the applicant? Okay. Mr. Bell, Mr. Trinick.
Thanks, sir. Yes, again, you've had a detailed landscape discussion on the localised, the term localised. I think the planning perspective on it is important. I think the first point I would make is that it is a planning judgment on the matter of localised and where such effects would be acceptable or not. And I think we also need to remember that all the significant effects don't need to be localised for a development to be acceptable. There is the reference in the policy to the role of design mitigation. And And whilst there have been attempts to define what is localised, the term at the end of the policy, namely that they will generally be considered to be acceptable, is indicative of requiring a planning judgment on acceptability in a given case. We don't have guidance, but we now have about 18 or so decisions since NPR4 came into force where the matter has been explored by reporters, planning authorities and ministers. I didn't expect today to be dealing with distances, but they've come up in the Council's response. And you will have Mr Welsh's evidence on the extent of significant effects in this case. I'm not going to go over that. But one decision which is for a scheme not too far from here is Achany, that's spelled A-C-H-A-N-Y, and it's an extension of an existing wind farm, and the reference is CD 11.002, and the key reference would be page 14.
That's the nature scope.
Where
CD 1102, that is the decision letter.
There's only a decision letter. There's no
yes.
inquiry.
Okay, and we have the paragraph, please.
There's no.
Sorry.
No paragraphs, but it's page 14. It's the first one.
14. Wait one.
Second last paragraph.
2 seconds.
It says starts. Nature Scott has no objection to the development on the basis of its landscape and visual impacts. Nature Scott acknowledged conclusions of the LVIA, and it would result in a limited number of localised significant effects on landscape character and visual immunity, affecting relatively localised parts of the landscape and visual resource up to 10 kilometres and locally to 12.5. And then further down in the letter, the ministers set out their position and they reiterate that distance. So I think that's a helpful reference. There are 2 other decisions that I think it would be helpful to refer to. One is Clochry, and the other one will be Glendow. There is another reference in Achany which I'm just trying to get at the moment, which is page 15.
Sorry, which one are we in? CD 1102 still?
Page 15, Achany, first paragraph of that page, where it states, the Scottish Ministers acknowledge that the development will have some significant landscape and visual impacts, but overall these would remain relatively localised, with the majority of significant effects occurring within 10 kilometres of the development and none at a distance greater than 12.5. So that's helpful early calibration of where Nature Scott and the ministers were looking at localised. Now that was a tip height of 149.9 metres to tip, so slightly different to the case we're dealing with here. But that's in the Sutherland landscape. Before going on to the 2 cases, namely Clochry and Glendow, my view from a planning perspective is that it does require a judgment on the geographical extent of influence from a wind farm, having regard to the landscape type in which the impacts would arise, along with reference to the relative size of the development, and also, and I think this is a point Mr Fitzpatrick picked up on, which I agree with, the nature and type of receptors that would be affected within the area. And in addressing acceptability, which is that term generally acceptable, I think it must refer to, in part, the geographical influence that might reasonably be expected for a wind farm of a given scale. Now, turning to the matters of, beyond the geographical extent, in the Clochry Section 36 decision, and the PLI report is 11.16, and the decision is 11.17, as the CD references.
Do you want me to open both of them? Are you going to...
I'm not going to go to
Okay.
really a specific paragraph. You could have a look at it, but the key issue for the reporter and the ministers was the regional significance of a hill known as the Merrick. That's M-E-R-R-I-C-K. And you'll see this on, probably the easiest read of it would be page 7 of the summary in the PLI report, where the reporter considered it as a distinct feature within the localised extent of impacts. So it wasn't a designation, it was a regional feature, which was it's a high hill in southwest Scotland that's well visited by recreational users. But I think perhaps a more recent and one that gives a very helpful explanation of the matter of localised relative to receptors is the Glendy decision. And if I could just refer to a few paragraphs from that. It's CD 11.21, that's the PLI report.
Just give me a second then. 11.21.
11.21.
Right, 2 seconds, let me find that.
And it's paragraph 9.132. Have you got that, sir? Yeah.
Nine 132, is that?
9.132. So the reporter's Karen Haywood, and she says there presently exists no specific guidance or case law to define how the term localised should be applied in the context of the proposals. And she goes on to refer to the fact that she's got a full landscape and visual impact assessment. And then at the next paragraph, she says the majority of visual effects would be limited to locations within 5 kilometres, which we consider to be localised in this case. And then the next paragraph, she says we interpret the conclusion, or we interpret the word generally to be implicitly clear that there will be occasions where localised impacts will not be acceptable. So I think that links to the point about not just the geographical extent, but the receptors that might be within the localised areas. And the reporters go on at paragraph 9.135 to reference particular viewpoints. In that case, it was 2 to 5. And they state this: we do not find that the visual impacts on a regionally prominent peak, so that's quite similar to the Merrick position in Clockery, with dedicated parking and a well-maintained footpath having links to the nation's easternmost Corbett or to a remote mountain bothy, are directly comparable to an isolated location with limited sensitive receptors. We do not therefore identify the site as being positioned in a location where localised impact should automatically be considered to be acceptable. And they go on to refer to the impacts on 3 locations in particular: Clachnabin, Mount Keen and Charbothy. And then the reporters repeat this point at paragraph 10.6 of the report, where in that paragraph they say that we consider the landscape and visual effects would predominantly be localised. We do not find them to be intrinsically acceptable because the greatest impacts would be on regionally prominent hill summits and popular destinations for hill walkers. Now, in that case, the reporters went on, nevertheless, to deem the development acceptable, and the ministers did not demur from that, and they adopted the reporters' findings and granted Section 36 consent. So I think what the Clockery and the Glendy decisions do is indicate that the term generally acceptable can be displaced where there are certain factors, such as those where the reporters identified them in those decisions, that would mean a development may not be acceptable. But certainly even in Glendy, although they were deemed regionally important by the reporter, and that was at Corbett and another hill, that was deemed acceptable, notwithstanding they were in a localised extent of effects from that scheme. So I hope that's helpful in terms of those cases. Mr. Trinick has got a final point to make.
So just a final point. It's in relation to the influence of the NSA on the topic of localised. I heard what Mr. Fitzpatrick said both yesterday and just now on that. I say that the fact of the NSA is irrelevant to the question of whether or not an effect is localised. We examine the issue of localised effects under policy 11E2. It needs also to look at policy 11D, which says, which we get it, sir?
Just a moment, I've got about 20 documents open. It was easier when it showed me a picture of it. Just a minute, I'll have to find it again. Where are we? CD7. And where did you want me to go in the document?
Policy 11, an MPF law policy 11D.
Yeah.
Policy 11E obviously covers project design mitigation will demonstrate how the following impacts are addressed. So that's LVIA, and it leads to E2. Policy 11D makes it clear that development proposals that impact on international or national designations will be assessed in relation to policy 4. That's where you go for the NSAs. And so the fact of the issue of localised effects doesn't enter into the equation in terms of a designation. And that makes logical sense because policy 11E2 is looking at general landscape and visual effects, are they localised or not? You look at NSAs by reference to the SLQs, and you ask if those SLQs are significantly affected, and if so, where that leads you. It's a different type of examination for NSAs, and inappropriate to bring in the issue of localised effects to an assessment of the impacts on NSAs.
Okay. Did you want to say any more before I invite the Council to respond? Okay, Mr. Finlay and Mr. Fitzpatrick.
Can I deal the three matters we need to deal with? One is the Akani decision. The passages that Mr. Bell drew attention to at page 14 are a recitation of Nature Scott's view. The passage on page 15 introduces a further refinement of the concept of localised, that is whether something is relatively localised, which is a terminology that has been used in decisions prior to MPF4, but one can say so with respect to a minister's decision, not entirely helpful. Either, if you look at MPF4, one would think that either something is localised or not. Whether it's relatively localised is a blurring of the lines. That said, every case has to be determined on its own, in terms of its own circumstances, and the passage, the paragraph in, I had noted it. Yes, in Mr. Welsh's evidence that I was seeking to refer to, that CD 12.1 was paragraph 220, where he says at the end of, in the last sentence of that paragraph, it's a case-by-case assessment, if I can summarise.
Oh, sorry, was that paragraph 20?
220. 220
of CD 12.1.
He says the point is that
So do you want me to find that?
No, I don't. You needn't go back to it. the judgment will vary from scheme to scheme and will depend on nature, scale and type of the receiving topography. Mr Fitzpatrick has something to say about the particular location of the canny.
Yeah, the decision notice refers to the Canny extension wind farm, which is relatively deep into the Glen Castle. So those effects will really run along the extent of the strath, rather than a sort of geographical extent that's of that goes wider than that.
So that was the first point. If I can then come to Glendy, the Glendy decision. The basic point that I think Mr Bell was making was that just because effects are localised doesn't necessarily mean they're acceptable, and vice versa. And I accept that, and Glendy is a good example of that. Glendy was in a bowl with limited effects beyond 5 kilometres, and it's perhaps a good indication, point Mr Fitzpatrick was making about a decision where reporters have used the 5 kilometre distance to, in that regard. I don't think there's much more to say about Glendy, except it again demonstrates that each case has to be decided on its own merits. The last point, in response to the point Mr Trinick was making, yes, to an extent, policy 11D refers to NSA as being dealt with under policy 4, but I'll reserve. I haven't gone back to look through the Narracombe decision, but my understanding of policy 11E was it's designed to have an overall balancing exercise. So, I reserve our position on that. The only thing I would say in this case is where one is looking from one side of an NSA over the NSA to a proposal beyond the NSA, well beyond the NSA, it would be difficult to accept that that is a local effect or a localised effect, and to bear in mind the words of Anne Cowling, it's clearly not in the same locality.
Okay. Did you want to say anything more before I invite the applicant to close? Did you need to respond to any of that? And otherwise, I'm quite happy for you to close unless there's other matters you want to raise.
I'll meet Mr Finlay on the blasted heath of submissions.
Mr Bell, were you wanting to come in?
Nothing else.
All right. That's fine. Okay, that concludes item 3. So we'll move on to item 4. Item 4, Highland Wide Local Development Plan, HWLDP 2012, CD 7.1, and Onshore Wind Energy Supplementary Guidance. I can't pronounce that. OWESG. CD 7.2. The applicant's hearing statement and the Jury Action Group's written statement appear to suggest that MPF4 has primacy. In the applicant's case, it suggests there to be conflicts between NPF4 and HWLDP, OWESG. The Council appears to take a contrary view, arguing them to be complementary. So I'll start with the Council. I'll start with the applicant. Have I properly understood it? Is this an accurate synopsis? And do those two documents complement or contradict NPF4?
Thanks, sir. I think, firstly, I wouldn't say NPF4 has primacy. I appreciate that's the way you've just summarised it, but I think the way I would put it is that in line with the changes that were made to the Planning Act, it's the later document that prevails, so that would be the position I would take if there's an incompatibility. And since NPF4 came into play, it's inevitable that we've been looking at a number of decisions to see how policies have been interpreted and applied. certainly not the specifics of a case or the facts. They're not relevant. But I referenced the Meal Buoy appeal decision, that paragraph 5.4.7, in my hearing statement, where the reporter there...
sorry, you're just going a bit fast there. Tell me what that
sorry,
reference was.
So that's Meal Buoy, that's spelled MEALL and BUIDHE.
And the paragraph, sorry, that you were referring to?
5.4.7 in my hearing statement. And it's CD reference 1125.
Sorry, are you sending me to the CD 1125, your hearing statement?
Yeah, my hearing statement will do rather than going to the appeal.
Yes, and so it was 547.
5.4.7.
I'm there, yep.
Yep.
Sorry, on
so what I'm relying on to say that that is an accurate synopsis, namely that there are some conflicts, is the position taken by the reporter in Meal Buoy. And I've just put in a quote there where the reporter refers to the supplementary guidance and states much of it is focused on the principles in Policy 67, so the Highland-wide development plan, and sets out a spatial framework in line with Table 1 of the previous SPP. And she goes on to say, National Planning Framework 4 approach no longer includes spatial frameworks, and some of the previous criteria, as stated in SPP, has been updated. Consequently, as I find incompatibility between the LDP and the framework, I rely on the framework as the later expression of development plan policy. Now, an additional point I have added, there's two. One is in table 5.1 in my hearing statement, that's on page 58, I've just provided a summary of the other relevant policies in the Highland-wide plan, and I've picked up on two additional references where the reporter in the Meal Buoy decision identified conflict, if you like, between the LDP policy and NPF4. One is Policy 55, peat and soils. The other one is Policy 57, in terms of natural, built and cultural heritage. Now, given the reasons for objection are not engaging those policies, there's perhaps not much of substance arising from those particular incompatibilities. But the last point I would make is, and I've put this in at 5.4.8, the supplementary guidance was also drafted several years ago when tip heights were much lower than those of today, and we do know from the onshore wind policy statement that turbine heights are increasing and have to attain targets. So my position is that that is an accurate synopsis, that there is some conflict between the two, and therefore contradiction, and I wouldn't call it a complementary position.
Okay, thank you. Did you want to say any more before I invite? Okay, Mr. Finlay, Mr. Fitzpatrick.
Yes. Our case is that they are complementary. By way of first point, I agree with Mr. Bell's comment on primacy. Both the Highland-wide Local Development Plan and NPF4 are part of the development plan. Neither has primacy as such, but because the latter document is a more recent emanation of government policy, it clearly probably has greater weight. But I think one has to be careful about the use of the word primacy, which I think was Mr. Bell's point and with which I agree. The second point is that there are a number of decisions which I will allude to briefly, but I'm not going to ask you to go to them because I will set them out in detail in our closing submissions. One can start with the Meal Buoy decision, and Mr. Bell has fairly summarised the position of Alison Cord in giving that decision. There are four other Highland Council decisions. There's Cairn Dewey, which is where the report is at CD 1142, a decision of Karen Hayward and another, where at paragraph 656 to 8, they don't directly consider the issue of contradiction or complementarity, but they do apply the criteria within the OSWEG, the supplementary guidance. So they've clearly applied it, so they can't think that it's contradictory. Kirken, which is at CD 11, you need to look at the supplementary report, because Kirken was one where there were two reports, one pre-MPF4 and one post-MPF4. CD 11.11 at paragraph 79 to 80, the reporter there, whose name is...
Do you want me to go there?
No. Rather approach the issue of whether something was contradictory or complementary by applying the policies, and if they came to the same conclusion, they complemented, and if they didn't, they were contradictory. I would say is, in my submission, not a wholly satisfactory test. One should be able to know in advance. A more recent decision is the second Strathrory decision, which is CD 11.28, a decision of Alistair Edwards. And at paragraph 38, he finds, notwithstanding there are some aspects of the Highland-wide local development plan and the supplementary guidance, on the whole they're complementary. And finally, Kintradwell, which is CD 1131. Again, there's no paragraph 726 to 730. There's discussion of the issue, but again, in our submission, a more nuanced approach is taken. Overall, there are clearly aspects of the supplementary guidance, such as the spatial framework, which are now out of date. But that doesn't, in our submission, make the document as a whole in conflict or contradict MPF4. And I refer you to two other decisions where one like a more nuanced approach has been taken. The first is Sanka 2 supplementary report at CD 1117, I think it is. Let me just check that. It's 1119. At paragraphs 2.74 to 2.84, it's dealing with a different council policy, but a similar policy to policy 67, which is broadly supportive of wind energy. And Garrigo Hill, which is CD 1151, very much more recent report, 11th of March this year, at paragraphs 9 to 13, where again a more nuanced approach is taken to the fact that, put short, just because a MPF4 has come in and is worded slightly differently with different emphasis doesn't necessarily mean the pre-existing document is in conflict with it. The two can be read together with a reasonable outcome. So for all those reasons, in our submission, the better approach is that taken not in the Meal-Bury decision, but in the other decisions, and that read intelligently and appropriately. Policy 67, and I refer to Policy 67 in particular because it's the prime policy in the Highland-wide local development plan dealing with situations such as this, and the guidance which follows from it, are intended to be supportive of wind energy and can be read as complementary to rather than in conflict with MPF4. That rather long-winded approach, having said it, to suggest that it is unlikely to make a significant difference, the outcome to that answer. In the Cairndarian, Kirken and Strathrory examples I gave you, I think permission was granted. In Treadwell, it was rejected. Garrigate Hill, I think it was rejected too. But one's unlikely to find a difference between the policies whereby Policy 67 would support a proposal and Policy 11 would be in conflict with it, or vice versa. So whilst it's an interesting, potentially interesting intellectual argument for lawyers, and one can understand why the question's been asked, the reality is that it's unlikely to be determinative the outcome of any particular application. And the last point is this, that the reason why Highland Council would wish to retain reference to the supplementary guidance is that it contains a number of criteria to which you'll recall that Mr. Welsh made reference to, I think, his Annex or Appendix 3 and in his report, which aren't pass or fail criteria. They're just a list of considerations to assist the decision maker in its approach, in which respect some reporters have found useful, some less useful. But in Highland Council's view, they are useful considerations to have regard to, as well as its consideration of the particular area considerations, leaving aside the framework has gone, the spatial framework has gone, to which can still perform a useful part in decision making. So whilst I say it's not going to be determinative of this case, there is a real point at stake in terms of Highland Council's approach. That is, it does wish to consider to continue to have regard to its supplementary guidance as appropriate, and we accept that parts of it aren't appropriate any longer.
Thank you. That's clear. Did you want to make any other remarks before? That was our full response, and I've taken that fairly briefly. All those references will be in our closing submissions. Mr. Trinick will be able to engage with them in due course. Thank you for that. Okay. I'll invite the applicants to come back then. Mr. Bell.
Thank you, sir. Just a few brief points. I think first point I would make is just an observation. I think it's difficult to salvage parts of a policy or a document where parts of it are clearly incompatible with national planning policy. Just to sort of pick and choose bit that may still be valid. We need to read the document as a whole. I was encouraged with Mr. Finlay saying that it's not a pass-fail test. I mean, that's consistently been Highland Council's position in my experience in dealing with the supplementary guidance, that it's not a development management test in any way, that it simply supports the judgment that's needed in Policy 67 as to whether the impact of a development would be significantly detrimental overall. And my understanding is that in terms of the criteria that were referenced in the supplementary guidance, and that was discussed in evidence, that there was only an issue with one of the criteria out of 10. And within the supplementary guidance, paragraph 4.17, it states the criteria do not set absolute requirements, but seek to ensure developers are aware of key constraints to development. So that's very much in line with, I think, what Mr. Finlay was saying. It's not pass-fail, it's to inform, which I think is helpful. But the wider aspects of the development plan have some differences. And Mr. Trinick referred to the requirement in Policy 11 Energy in NPF 4 that in considering impact, significant weight will be placed on the contribution of the proposal. And whilst Policy 67 and the LDP does take into account the contribution of a development, the wording is quite specific here in Policy 11, and of course it needs to be read alongside Policy 1, where there's significant weight to dealing with both the climate emergency and the nature crises. And we've been through this morning in terms of the nationally important benefits, not just to dealing with the climate crisis, but the biodiversity crisis, assuming you accept the position of significant biodiversity enhancement. So my point was just to bear in mind those differences when looking at the overall complementarity or contradiction with NPF4 between the LDP and the SG.
Thank you for that. Was there any bits you need to come back on, Mr. Finn?
No, save for two short points. One is that many of the aspects that Mr. Bell was referring to are dealt with in the reporter's decisions that I've referred to. And secondly, to say that it is a live dispute as to how one approaches contradiction at the moment. I was at a solar lecture in Dundee on Friday where Alistair Sutherland referenced, I think Edinburgh Council takes a very strict view and Stirling Council takes a more nuanced view as to conflict or contradiction. And so some guidance on that overall would be helpful, because there will be cases where it does make a difference.
Was that all you wanted to add?
Yep.
Yep. Does anyone from the applicant want to come back? No? No? Are we all done for both of those? Yep. Did you want to make any closing remarks on that basis, Mr. Chairman?
No,
Okay, thank you all for that. That brings us to the end of item 4 and to the end of this hearing session on policy. I'm just looking at the time, it's 12:21. I'm going to make a suggestion that we take an earlier lunch, and I'll take soundings on the exact amount of time you want. I'm happy to come back at 1, but if you'd be desperate to take a little bit longer, then I'd be happy to do that. And in that lunch break, I will read the document that we discussed this morning, which was 1606, and that should allow me to then be in a position to proceed with the agenda. Mr. Trinick first.
In your answer, you need the time rather than us, so 1 is fine.
Mr. Finlay.
Just a little bit longer would be appreciated. We're going to my hotel for lunch, which is only about 3 minutes away, but if it could be 1:15 to 1:20, we'll be back as soon as we can.
That's fine. All right, look, let's just take an hour. Let's just say we're back at 1:20. Then I've got plenty of time to read things. Everybody can have sufficient lunch and all the rest of it. Okay, no problems. Right, we'll be back at 1:20 then, please. Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everybody. That's just gone 1:20 on the afternoon of Wednesday, 27th of March, 2024. Welcome back. This morning we concluded the policy hearing session, so this afternoon we are going to press ahead with the conditions hearing session. Previously that had been scheduled to take place tomorrow, but we have agreed that there's ample time today to consider the matters there in the hope that we can conclude that. So that's what we're going to do. Over lunchtime, I've had a chance to read through document 1606, which we discussed this morning, which I understand to be the most recent schedule of conditions and agreements between the applicant and the council on the matters covered therein. As I mentioned this morning, what I'd quite like to do this afternoon is, for the benefit of me and indeed for those who are following at home or elsewhere, to run through the agenda, and then we can pick up the items in 1606 as appropriate. And when we get to the end, if there's some other elements of that we've not touched on and we need to, then I'm happy to make time to do that. Is there anything for me before we start? Mr. Trinick? No? Mr. Finlay? No? Okay. Right, so as I've been doing this morning, I'll read through the first item of the agenda. There's quite a bit to read through, and I appreciate that we may find that quite a number of these matters are dealt with, and we'll have a chance to explore that. So item 1, controlling what would be consented, previously based on CD 16.005, which was the previous iteration of the situation between the applicant and the council. So the reporter understands that discussions between the applicant and developers of adjacent leg 2 has resulted in removal of proposed turbine T19 and limits to micro-siting for proposed turbine T28. The reporter further understands that the modified description of the proposal in CD 16005 Annex 1 is to respond to that by reducing to 24 the number of turbines. The reporter also understands that the micrositing matters have been covered in proposed condition 11 micrositing. The first sentence after the bullet points in Annex 1 states, notwithstanding any plans which indicate otherwise, turbine 19, the access track solely associated with it, and the crane hard standing area for that turbine, as shown on Air Figure 2.1a, shall not be constructed. By the reporter's reading of Annex 1, references being made to Air Figure 2.1a CD 001.015, which shows a site layout that includes turbine T19. This is because the first sentence following the bullets in Annex 1 above describes how T19 shown on that site layout will not be built. However, Air Figure 2.1a is also referenced in proposed condition 11 micrositing and proposed condition 27 local radio link infrastructure for the energy industry, and those conditions therefore appear to include T19, which is proposed for removal. The reporter notes that the applicant has submitted a revised site layout plan, which is also called Figure 2.1a, but which is dated February 2024, CD 012.004. It appears to account for the proposed removal of T19, its access track and crane hard standing. There's a number of bullets which I'll run through just now. So is the above an accurate synopsis of matters? Could the first sentence after the bullet points in Annex 1 quoted above, so that would be Annex 1 of 16005, reasonably be considered part of the development description? Does the current reference in Air Figure 2.1a, CD 001.015 by proposed condition 11 and 27 create a conflict or contradiction with what is being stated and or sought in Annex 1 as written? And then just over the page, which version of Figure 2.1a is intended to be referred to in Annex 1 and also any other points where it is referenced, and would replacing text in Annex 1 and or proposed conditions 11 and 27 and any others where it is relevant with Figure 2.1a dated 2024 CD 012.004 create conflicts or contradictions? There's a second part which talks about proposed condition 29, but I think we'll deal with the first bit before we get on to that. Quite a few interrelated things, but I understand that 16.006 may well resolve or deal with some of these, so I'll invite the applicant first just to talk me through that. When the applicant's done that, Mr Finlay for the Council and Mr Fitzpatrick will be able to come back and make any remarks they want to make. So, Mr Trinick.
Thanks, sir. Yes. Dealing with the bullet points one by one, the above was indeed an accurate synopsis of matters as at the time that you issued the agenda, which was on the basis of the 1st March 16.5. As things are now, looking at point 2, you'll see what we've done is to delete the wording after the bullet points, and instead, in the first bullet point, simply put up to, or 24. There's a debate about the words up to, which is outstanding. The deal with the number of turbines there, making that sentence after the bullet points unnecessary. We say that the words up to should be restored, and the reason for that, if we look at fast forward to condition 11, which is on page 15, internal page, well, you've got hard copy, page 15. Is it condition 11? Yeah.
Yes, I've got condition 11 on page 15.
Covers the point. We don't. Does it cover the up to? I'm not sure it does. So I'm terribly sorry, I got the wrong condition number. I'm playing catch up here. It's condition 29.
29.
Which one is it? I was in the first place. Condition 11. Yeah. Right, so I was right, it was condition 11 all the time, but It's a very long one. It's at the condition 11I, which is on page 17 and 18.
Just at the bottom of 17, spilling over.
Yeah.
Okay.
The prior written approval of the planning authority shall be required if the number of turbines to be built is less than 24. So, and I give you a thumbs up from Mr. Finlay to say that approach is okay.
You're both happy with that approach, right? So that would mean you are content to accept the words up to in front of that bullet.
And the
Sorry, I didn't. Okay, right. Sorry.
I think it's important that you do restore those words, because if you don't, and it's just 24 turbines, that makes condition 11I ineffective, because actually we're stuck with the words of limitation of whatever the conditions say. So it's important to have that condition. The answer to your bullet point 3 is yes. In short, we've now referenced in Annex 1 condition, figure 21A of February 24, you will see, and all references to the previous figure in other conditions have been removed and figure 21A February 24 substituted, except I think there's one thing you may need to do for yourself. Just check. Yes, in the reason for condition 11, a reference to the earlier figure, escape detention, so you need to put in February 24 in the reason for condition 11.
So it would be your position that, as presently written, is incorrect and should say the February 24 version. Sorry, I see. So that's somewhere, but your point is that definitely needs to be Feb 24. Yes. Okay. And right. Okay. Understood.
Answered. It's the February 24 point again, and the fifth bullet point, the answer is no. No conflicts will arise, and that gives you the our answers to those questions.
Okay, thank you for that. That's helpful. Just before I invite the Council to respond on those matters, in Annex 1, I noticed that there had previously been a dispute, and may still be one, about the first bullet in Annex 1, which refers to not exceeding 180 metres, and I have it in this document underlined and not crossed out, and then next to it underlined and crossed out. Yes, I'm prepared to accept that's alternative positions, but it'd be useful to know whose is whose.
No, we've been inserting it, crossing out, and we caught up with each other in the wrong way. That should, in our view, be deleted.
So the applicant does not wish to have reference to the height of the turbines in the annex,
no,
as was previously my understanding.
We do now have a condition, and we'll come to it, I can't remember the number of it, where the height of the conditions is, the blade tip height is regulated.
From memory, it might have been in the 20s somewhere, but I like you, struggle to recall
which one it is. But the reason that we really do not want the reference to tip height within the description of the development is the same as I gave in relation to the words up to, that the condition will, it must be fair to allow the applicant at a later date to apply under section 42 to vary the tip height. But if the words are also in the words of limitation, then there would need to be a section 36C application in order to do that. Because of the Finney case, if you remember.
I'm happy for you to remind me. It might remind me of. I understood the arguments that had originally been presented by you, but I'm happy for you to make to me the points you want to from that particular case.
There was I can't remember the details. You gave me the case reference, Mr. Finlay, I'm sure, but there's a case we called Finney, which confirmed that while a section in England 73 and Scotland 42 application can be made to vary a planning condition, that will be ineffective if the words are also in the words of limitation, because you can't vary those by a Section 42 or Section 73 application. Yeah. I use the words as a limitation. That's probably a Planning Act phrase. Description of development might be a better phrase.
Okay, that's understood. Did you want to say any more before I invite the council?
Thank you. Thank you for picking that up, sir. I missed that point.
No, quite right. Okay, Mr. Finlay, Mr. Fitzpatrick, anything to respond?
No, just the reasons why we don't agree are in the document in front of you, so they remain the same.
But you're otherwise you heard obviously Mr. Trinick run through his analysis of the bullet points that I presented. Is your answer the same on those, accepting that I think you and Mr. Finlay have agreed that you are happy with the words up to being inserted, but that your disagreement is about the tip height being included in Annex 1? And is that the only area of disagreement in your view?
In the description of development, I think we've got in the next bullet points in your agenda.
Yes, we'll deal with proposed condition 29 shortly. I wasn't sure how long the previous section would take us. I thought it was probably handy to deal with them separately, so I'll be delighted to come to that in just a moment. But on the matters in hand, have you got anything else that you wanted to add?
Nothing further to add. Thank you.
Mr. Trinick, you've heard what they look, so you want to come back on any of it?
The tip heights in condition 18.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, if everyone's content, we'll move on to the second part of item 1 then. So I'll just read through this as before. The applicant and council disagree on the necessity for proposed condition 29, implementation in accordance with approved plans. The applicant appears to believe that Annex 1 is sufficient. So, firstly, is that an accurate synopsis? And then secondly, several bullets which are perhaps interrelated. Is proposed condition 29 seeking to replace or replicate Annex 1? What status would Annex 1 have if it is not a condition? Should Annex 1 be a condition? And if so, should it be a Section 36 condition or a deemed Planning Commission condition? And then I think we'll deal with this final one separately, so I think I'll come back to that and focus on the first 4 bullets. And I think I'll ask the council first this time to come in, and then we'll speak to the applicant. So either Mr. Fitzpatrick or Mr. Finlay.
We note that there's no reference to the EIAR report or the additional information report or the AI that was submitted in Appendix 1. If there was reference to this in Appendix 1, then we would happily forego condition 29.
So when you say Appendix 1, do you mean Annex 1, or is there something else?
Sorry, I meant Annex 1, yeah.
Okay. So just bear with me a second, let me locate what I was looking for. So you are saying provided Annex 1 references the EIAR, the original environmental impact assessment report for the 37 turbines, then you would be content to forego inclusion of condition 29. Is that how I understood that properly?
No, it would need to reference the EIAR as well as the AI and the AIR as well.
And that would be in Annex 1. So just let me make sure I understood this. So reference to the original EIAR to, I can't even read, AIR, and was that the only 2 documents, or was there, did you mention a third?
The AI as well, and AIR.
The additional, and by that you mean the updated cumulative landscape and visual impact assessment and other?
Yes, there was, during the course of the applications assessment, there was additional information submitted as well. So as far as any of those documents remain relevant in the EIAR, AI and AIR, then we're happy for that to be referenced in.
I'm sorry, the reasoning for my question was I was aware that there was some additional information submitted on noise earlier in the process, and then obviously at my request some updates were submitted during 2023. So in your description of AI, do you mean everything, or do you mean to omit any of those that I've referenced, or I just want to understand what it is you're after.
Just the most up-to-date documents that are being approved. So basically, we're transferring the references in condition 29 to Annex 1.
So that would be. So I'm just reading under the title. So within the text, as I see it, under condition 29, you have. I mean, you've got the title, and there's some red text. It's read in the document I'm looking at. Starts except as otherwise required. Follows through. It references Air Figure 2.1A dated Feb 24, and then says and 2. It says the updated EIAR. I think it refers to the additional noise, additional informational report, and other documentation lodged. So it's that reference under point 2 that I was trying to understand that you were just talking about. Have I properly understood this time?
Yes.
And it would be your wish, were you to dispense with your request for condition 29 for that text under part 2 of that to live somewhere in Annex 1?
Yes.
And where in Annex 1 would you imagine would be the best place for that to live? You might not have a preference, but it would be helpful to me if you could indicate where.
The section with the bullet points, the development includes, where the development comprises. So it could be in the first paragraph or underneath the bullet points in the description of development.
Right. So your intention, right? So that I've understood this properly. Point 2 from proposed condition 29 would form a bullet point in Annex 1 under the development includes.
Yeah, or it can be included in the first paragraph. The important thing is that it's referenced.
So, right. So you would be equally content for it to live in the first paragraph. Okay.
Yes, in any part of the Section 36 description of development.
So far as you're concerned, that is the nature of your disagreement. So, and I think I asked, don't I, somewhere. I appreciate you might not have got to this yet, so forgive me if I'm kind of treading on your toes of something you're about to tell me. Because I ask obviously about the status of Annex 1. I ask about whether Condition 29 is seeking to replace or replicate Annex 1 and whether Annex 1 should be a condition. Do I take it you are content either way on the latter? And I'd be appreciative if you could address the first 2 bullet points as well in that answer.
So, which bullet points, sorry?
I'm sorry, the ones on my agenda. So I'd said under this item of the agenda, I'd said is the synopsis accurate, but I'd then gone on to say, is proposed condition 29 seeking to replace or replicate Annex 1? And you appear to be saying to me, I think you appear to be saying to me the contents could be interchangeable, in the sense that you don't seem to have a fixed view on whether it. Wrong. Sorry. Let me say that again. You don't appear to be adamant that it should be a condition because you appear content that it could live in Annex 1 if that was so. Have I understood that?
Our main concern is that the development proceeds in accordance with with how it's been assessed and with accordance with approved documents. So it would. I wouldn't say it's trying to replace or replicate Annex 1. It's as such because there's the description of the development, but the development has been described throughout the EIA and AI through all the documents that have been submitted in support of it.
I see. So long as it is described either in terms of what is consented and permitted, or that separately in a condition, it can be either or from your point of view, provided that it mentions those documents that you've referenced.
Yes.
And so you don't seem to mind either way, whether, as I say, you don't seem to mind either way whether it's a condition or whether it's a right. That's fine. I think it had been unclear to me previously. Okay. Did you want to say any more before I invite the applicant to come back?
No. Thank you.
Mr. Trinick.
So if you can read out the fifth point as well, and then I can deal much more happily with them all together.
Yes, I'm happy to do that, although I may need to invite the council back on those points. Yes, so the fifth one is proposed condition 29 necessary to ensure that mitigation measures covered by Air Chapter 11 are delivered, and if not, how would that be ensured? So yes, you're welcome to address that.
So let's go back to the structure of a consent, first of all. There is a description of the development. That's Annex 1. It's not a condition, it's a description of the development. Secondly, you then have conditions which regulate the implementation and operation of the development and secure mitigation, so far as the decision maker thinks appropriate. Not all mitigation in the EIAR or AIR has to be carried out. What has to be carried out is what the conditions say have to be carried out. Some of the mitigation outlined in the EIAR may be unnecessary in the mind of the decision maker. It's not all picked up. So the description of the development says what you can do. The conditions say how you do it. They're very distinct. In this case, we have Annex 1, which says what we can do. And we have the conditions, a lot of them, 1 to 35, that say how you do it and how you decommission afterwards. So condition 29 is completely unnecessary. You don't need to say what it says because other conditions cover everything that needs to be covered in terms of implementation and operation and decommissioning. Far worse than that, condition 29 is completely imprecise and unenforceable. Simply saying we will undertake development in accordance with 3 documents, which are to some extent mutually inconsistent anyway, because the AIR overtakes the EIAR. The EIAR related to 37 turbines. AIR relates to 24, 25. They're inconsistent documents. You can't simply implement in accordance with 3 documents. It makes no sense. Such a condition is void for imprecision, necessity, enforceability, ergo reasonableness as well. It just doesn't stack up. You have a perfectly satisfactory situation with Annex 1 saying what and the other conditions saying how. The answer to your third bullet point is Annex 1 simply isn't a condition anyway. It's not a choice. It's a description of the development. That answers the fourth point, and the fifth point I've already answered as I've gone through. I'm sorry if I sound a bit thumping about that, but I think we really need to go back and look at what a permission actually is, and then proceed from there.
Very well, that's clear, thank you. Before I invite the council to come back, did you want to cover anything else under those? Okay, that's fine. Mr. Fitzpatrick, Mr. Finlay, you've obviously, there was the final bullet, which I'm happy for you to come back on if you disagree or for you to advise me on, because you hadn't previously had a chance, and you've heard Mr. Trunick's response to his view of Condition 29 and more broadly of Annex 1. We'd be very happy to hear any points of agreement or disagreement you may have.
So can I just deal with points of law, effectively, that Mr. Trinick was making. First of all, I understand from Mr. Fitzpatrick the Council's position is that usually favoured by the ECDU. Sorry, the ECU, Energy Consent Unit. Yep. Secondly, I'm just trying to find the reference to it. In a condition that requires compliance with an EIAR or words to that effect is perfectly lawful and satisfactory. And I believe, I'm just checking it, that one was at the heart of one of the issues in the Trump and Scottish ministers case. It references 2015 UKSC 74. And the third point is that the documents would be read as a whole, and insofar as one overtakes the other, that would be taken into account of as a matter of interpretation of the documentation. So I don't accept Mr. Trinick's categorisation of the proposed condition as unlawful for any of the reasons that he suggested, but ultimately it will be a matter for your judgment as to whether it's appropriate or not. That's all I had to say.
Okay, Mr. Trinick, do you want to respond?
I didn't say it was unlawful. I was addressing the tests in Circular 4 of 1998, which are a different matter, a matter of policy. Saying that one document overtakes another, are we really saying that in an enforcement situation, a planning authority has to trawl through 3 documents, find out which bit overtakes another? It's a nonsense. It would be unworkable. It would be unenforceable for the reasons I have given. I repeat, the conditions which you recommend to the ministers are those which are necessary to regulate the implementation and operation of the development. They cover all matters. They cover, let's be precise, the commencement of development, decommissioning, financial bond, micrositing, construction management plan, traffic management plan, habitat management plan, construction hours, appearance, the battery storage, aviation charting, noise, borrow pits, compensatory planting, water supplies. These are all matters which are addressed in the EIR and AIR, where promises are made to do something. The difference is the conditions which you've got in front of you do so precisely and enforceably. Condition 29, I repeat, is hopelessly imprecise and unenforceable.
You want to respond?
So if indeed it is hopefully imprecise and unenforceable, it would be unlawful too. But I've made my submissions on that.
Okay, Mr. Trinick, do you want to add anything? No? Okay. People are content, then we'll move on to item 2. This is energy storage technology and facility. I'll read through all of these, and I think what we'll try and do is take the first 2 bullets first, and then we'll take the second next. But we may well find ourselves straying into both, so I'm happy to do that if that's where it leads us. Is the disagreement on proposed condition 6, energy storage technology, CD 16.005, pages 6 and 7, about the principle of that proposed condition, its contents, who approves the matters covered in section 1 of it, or something else? What need, if any, is there for Scottish ministers to approve the battery technology and for its installation and commissioning to be reported to them, or any other authority as the case may be? That's section 3 of proposed condition 6. And what difference, if any, is there between the matters to be approved in writing under section 1 of the proposed condition 6 versus those of section 1 of proposed condition 20, design of battery energy storage facility, CD 16.005, document pages 34 and 35, accepting that the pages in 16.6 may well have changed slightly. So this was a condition, I think, sought by the Council, so I'll invite Mr Fitzpatrick and Mr Finlay to advise me on these matters first, please.
So the condition was suggested by myself because it's included in, as normal, in Section 36 conditions for wind farms. And as far as I'm aware, Scottish ministers are keen that the energy type should be reported to them for their own records. For that reason, I would say that this condition is substantively different to the condition regarding the appearance and the layout and design of the battery energy facility, because condition 6 deals with the energy storage technology. This would be a Section 36, so I don't think I would be defending it so vigorously. I felt like it must have been an oversight on the applicant's part. In terms of satisfying the condition at the point before it would be for the applicant to demonstrate to the planning authority that the Scottish ministers are satisfied with the energy, have acknowledged and have been satisfied with the energy storage technology proposed. It wouldn't, in terms of pre-commencement conditions, but we would just need to be satisfied that was in fact done. I think I've covered your questions.
Can I just take you to the third bullet then? So you're saying you think those things are distinct. So what difference, if any, is there between the matters to be approved in writing under Section 1 of proposed Condition 6? So in that, it appears to be the type of technology, if I've understood correctly what you're asking for. Whereas if I was to jump ahead to proposed Condition 20, and you have to give me a second to do that because I've nearly there. Condition 20 refers to a series of matters, one of which is technical specification. And I was interested in the extent to which you view this as being substantively different. I realise you've mentioned your belief that this should be a Section 36 consent. My apologies, a Section 36 condition. But I'm interested in on those matters. Do you think this is distinctly separate to the technical specifications referenced here, or is your reason for putting it as a separate condition because it's, in your view, a Section 36 condition, and therefore necessarily it would need to live somewhere differently to something that isn't a Section 36 condition?
I mean, we would expect to be informed as well of the technology involved in the battery energy storage system as part of the deemed consent condition, but with regards to reporting to ministers, which is essentially what Condition 6 is about, to Scottish ministers. And that's what, Condition 20 is about the design of the battery energy storage facility, in which condition only a part of that condition would be with regard to the technology involved and type of storage. It more concerns layout, sorry. It's more concerns design and layout and siting of the actual facility.
Yes, so my understanding then, I think you've perhaps clarified in your latter statements for me. So your view, as I take it, is Condition 20 is about the facility, and from what you've described to me, is it fair for me to take that, in your view, to mean the ground upon which whatever battery storage technology is chosen would stand and how that's done, but Condition 6 is covering the technology that would stand upon the ground that is covered by Condition 20? Is that a fair way for me to understand the distinction that you're wanting me to understand?
That sounds fair to me, yeah.
Okay. And let me just look through these. And so in response to the first bullet of my questions then, I think I'm clear. Yeah, I think I'm clear on those. There'll be a chance to come back if there's some matters. But did you want to say anything else before I invite the applicant to come back?
No. Thank you.
Mr. Trinick.
Thanks, sir. I thought we were going to have some disagreement about this, but I'm starting to sway towards Mr. Fitzpatrick's position. The debate is not about the principle. That's the first point. And I can see, and talking of Mr. Baird as my client, he can see, more to the point, that Condition 6 is talking about the type of technology, whereas Condition 20 is talking about the details of what is to be installed. And I can see why the ministers would be interested in the type of technology, one type of battery as opposed to another. I can see that. So I don't think we necessarily oppose Condition 6, noting that the description of the development Annex 1 does include the words battery storage unit, so it's in there. So if we have Condition 6 to regulate the type of energy storage facility, once that's approved, we move on to Condition 20 to deal with the details. So I think we're probably now in agreement.
Did the council want to come back on that at all?
Nothing further to add, thank you.
Okay, so Mr. Trunick, I take it what you both seem to be saying is there was on paper a dispute, but there now doesn't appear to be. Have I understood that properly? Thank you both. That's very helpful. Okay, let's move on then to item 3. I have a suspicion this is one where we may find ourselves a little bit like item 1, where there are several matters that are answered. But nevertheless, I'll go through the points here. I think there were several points of detail. So this is item 3, decommissioning and restoration, proposed condition 9, and financial guarantee, proposed condition 10, CD 1605, pages 8 to 15. In 06, those pages may well have changed slightly. Is the disagreement regarding leaving access tracks, hard standings, and possibly other infrastructure in situ post-decommissioning about the principle of doing so, about the mechanism for enabling that to happen, or something else? And how would this relate to proposed condition 1, restricting the consented scheme to 30 years, which the applicant and council agree on? I realise there's a number of others, but I'd like to deal with these two first, and then I'll go back and read out the others. So I'll ask the applicant first, please, to come in on this one.
Thanks, sir. The disagreement is about the principle. After 30 years or so, it's going to cause more damage to remove the underground elements of the development, the tracks and the foundations, than to leave them in place. And that has been almost universally recognised over 35 years of wind energy development. However, we have gone halfway to meet the council in condition 9.2.
And 9.2, is this in your column or the Highland Council's column?
Yes, sorry, in the applicant's column, where about 2/3 of the way, halfway down, it says it shall include, that is the IDRP, shall include, without limitation, proposals for the removal of the above ground elements of the development, and confirmation of the status of the subterranean, interesting word, subterranean elements of the development, retention, removal, or other disposal. If you were to ask me what that means in terms of an enforceable condition, I'm not sure I could answer, but at least we've gone some way to meet the council in their aspirations to control what is below the ground. Answering your second point, I suppose I might say I don't quite understand the question, in the sense that the 30-year term simply tells you when the permission expires. Condition 9 and the related condition 10 tell you what happens when it does expire.
Yes, I was. That's helpful. I think part of my rationale for asking the question and perhaps returning to the circumstances that existed prior to the more recent document submission, my understanding was that if condition 1 was put in place with any approval, then the proposal would be approved for 30 years, and that would be the entire proposal, including bits of it that were underground and on the ground. And therefore, if you wanted to keep some of them, might there be a process to go through? Now, you may take the view that the conditions deal with that, and I'd be happy for you to tell me if that's so. But my rationale for asking the question was to understand those circumstances.
Well, certainly condition 1, all that secures is that you stop generating. That's all it does. You don't have permission to operate after 30 years. And indeed, for most other forms of development, that's all you get. You're not required to decommission. But wind energy development has historically been required to decommission, so we have conditions accordingly. What is to be taken out, how it is to be taken out, what restoration and aftercare is to be provided is covered by condition 9. So the details are in the condition. And indeed, it may be that in due course, the applicant or the owner of the development at that time says to the planning authority, do you mind if we keep this building for something else? Well, that's a separate issue. But the assumption is that all the above ground elements will go and the land will be restored.
Okay, was that all you wanted to say just now before I invite the council back? Okay, Mr Finlay, Mr Fitzpatrick, you've had a chance to listen to that. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, we agree it's in principle. The condition requires the decommissioning and removal of the development as described in Annex 1. So any caveats to that would come under condition 9, for any exceptions. So there's an understanding that turbine foundations are cut below the ground level and left in situ. We understand that that's because taking out turbine foundations does more damage than good. I think our main concern here is to do with new and upgraded access tracks, as well as other areas of hard standing, really, that shouldn't be left as a scar on the landscape after they've served their purpose of serving this development. There may be reasons for that landowners would want to retain some of the infrastructure, but regarding their long-term impact, which could be environmental, landscape and visual beyond the lifetime of the wind farm, we consider that should be properly assessed through an application for planning permission at that time. So,
is it a fair interpretation that actually there's not a lot of disagreement between you? Are you, if I've understood you both correctly, and Mr. Trinnick can come back in a moment if he thinks I've misinterpreted what he said, but my understanding is that he was saying the consent would be as set out in Annex 1 in the event that it was approved. Condition 9 would tell you what you were going to take to bits, and Condition 1 would tell you how long you could generate for. And there is an approval process, as I understand it, for the documentation under Condition 9. So if removing bits and not removing other bits is part and parcel of that approval, presumably is that the process that achieves the thing that you've just described? And therefore, do you agree with what he says? Or have I misunderstood something? And I just wasn't clear where the area of disagreement lay.
We disagree with the including in the condition the exception to access tracks and areas of hard standing.
So is it your preference? So if those are not in the condition per se as written into it, is it your understanding that the applicant's intentions of how to deal with those under its decommissioning plans would be subsequently approved by the authority, you could end up with the same outcome. You could end up with some things being left, but is it the mechanism there that is the distinction? I'm trying to understand whether it's simply the fact that you don't want those words in the condition. You'd rather have the ability to see what it is that's proposed and approve it or not approve it through the approval process for the plans. Have I understood that properly?
I think so.
Imagine if you told me again what it is rather than me assuming that I knew what it was. I'd rather have a yes than an I think so.
Basically, Condition 9 sets out that the development, which is described in Annex 1, should be removed. We're not content that that there should be an automatic exclusion for access tracks and areas of hard standing. So these would be surface level this would be infrastructure on the surface that will have a landscape, visual and environmental impact beyond the lifetime of the development. Does that make sense?
I think so. So it would not include something that was underground.
Yeah, the restoration plan it has to give us an idea of how turbines would turbine hard. I can't even think of the word.
That's all right. Just give yourself a moment and just when you're ready, it's fine.
The foundations for the turbines would be cut. I think our preference is a minimum of 0.5 metres. I think we've actually preferred 1 metre, but they would be cut below the area ground, and then there would be restoration done to the soil and the surface after that. Our concern then is that the applicant seeks to be able to leave in place other surface infrastructure such as hard standing and access tracks that fall under Annex 1. But if they're with the wording of the condition that the applicant proposes, they wouldn't automatically have to remove that infrastructure. It would just be allowed to remain in place, and we don't think that that should be the case.
And so you seek the removal of the words that would enable that to happen. And would you accept, at least in hypothetical terms, that if those words were removed, the applicant might come along with a proposed decommissioning plan that said there's certain bits we would like to keep, and then you as an authority, and I'm not trying to hold you or get you to tell me what your decision would be, but at least there would be a possibility through that decision-making process whether you might, in the end, allow some things to be retained and others not. But that would be something for the process of your approval rather than immediately written into the condition.
Yes, it should be assessed at the time, not 30 years beforehand.
Right, I think I understand more clearly now. Before I invite the applicant to come back, did you want to say any more?
Not on those 2 points, thank you.
When you say those 2 points, you mean the 2 bullets we're dealing with just now, and we'll come on to the other bits later. Have I understood that?
Correct, yeah.
Okay, that's fine. Mr. Trunick, you want to come back?
I can see what Highland Council are trying to achieve here, and I understand it. We accept that all the above ground structures must be removed. I think we agree that the foundation should remain save for whether it's 0.5 or 1 metre below the surface. If you cut at that level, that's okay with us. In terms of the access tracks, by the time they've been there for all that time, we just feel it would cause far more damage than good to try to take them out and restore the land. Far more damage than good. I guess there's also the question, if you are going to take them out, there's going to have to be some import of material in order to fill the hole where the access tracks were. and that's not provided for anywhere. I'm not sure where that's coming from. So, in our view, at the very most, what might be required is to lay some topsoil over the tracks and seed it so that the appearance of the tracks disappears. But to remove them seems quite counterproductive. Sorry.
Okay. The council want to respond to that?
Well, we know that good practice and best practice change over time. We'd accept some wording in the condition that says except for without prior approval of the planning authority at the time, so that it can be done through the condition as opposed to separate application. But we still think 30 years prior to the decommissioning of the development, it's potentially too soon to come to that conclusion.
And is that then the nub of this, that in your view the condition would presuppose an outcome which you think is better judged at a different time in the future?
I think that's a fair summation, yeah.
Okay. Do you want to say anything more about it before I invite the applicant back?
Not at this stage.
Mr. Trinick.
We're also thinking ahead of the 30 years when the lease is over and the landowners resume control of the land. They may well have perfectly sound and justifiable purposes for wanting to use the hard surface for purposes not requiring planning permission, the general use of their land. So we're very wary to speak for landowners beyond the end of the lease in that sense. We don't know what they want to do. But I can only go back to what I said, that if the purpose of decommissioning is to restore the capital of the environment to that which it was before the development, then you're not helping matters by digging out lots of access tracks at that time. That's not helping achieve the purpose, whatever the best practice guidance is at the time. Far better to leave them there.
Okay. I think it's evident there's a disagreement, but I think there was an issue that you'd not previously responded to, so I'll let you respond if you want to. Otherwise, I'll invite the applicant to close on that particular bit.
No, just to say, I think it's been implicit in everything I've said that we don't know what the landowner would want to do at the end, but I don't think that matters at this stage. Thank you.
I think certainly on that matter you've both made the same point, haven't you? Did you want to say any more on that before I move on to the other bullets? No? No? Okay, right, let's move on then. So the third bullet now, let's deal with this on its own. Who does the text belong to that is written in red in the final paragraph of THC column 4, proposed condition 9 on 16005 document, page 13. Now, I think in the modified version, there is something to that effect. I'll invite the council just to tell me, because I think it's in their column. So, and I don't know if it's. I think it might still be page 13 of the new document. There is an inserted comment that says this insertion was proposed by THC. And this is in relation to development and confirmation of status of proposals to remove all turbine foundations to a minimum of 0.5 metres below surface ground level, etc., etc. Is that the answer to my question that I've just posed?
It is.
It is. Okay. Mr. Trinick, you're content that that's the answer as well, whether you agree with it or not, but nevertheless, it's nothing else on that one. Right. A few similar points of clarity, I think, as we go through, and I'm aware that some of these matters, I think, have been picked up, but I think we'll go through them anyway for clarity's sake. There are references to DEMP and/or IDRP in proposed condition 9, sections 3 and 5. There appears to be a disagreement on whether proposed condition 9, section 3, it is the finalised DEMP or the IDRP. that is to be submitted, and whether it should be submitted 12 months or 3 months prior to decommissioning, which is the correct document to reference, which is the correct time frame in which to submit it, and what is the rationale for this. I think we'll deal with that one first, and then we'll come on to the next bullet. Perhaps I can ask the applicant to appraise me on this one.
They're both the correct references. They're just a matter of timing. That 9.2 requires the IDRP to be submitted and approved before the development commences. 9.3 covers the detailed plan. I'm going to make a suggestion to slightly amend the wording of the left column, which I'm looking at there. It says not later than 12 months prior to final decommissioning of the development, which becomes a rather circular way of phrasing things, because we don't know when the final decommissioning will be. I think it should read not later than 12 months prior to the expiry of the consent.
This is on page 9 of
page 9, left column, condition 9.3. So, yes, if I read out how I think it should read, not later than 12 months prior to the expiry of the consent. That's a clear date. We know when we have to do something. As phrased, it's not clear when it would happen. Because when final decommissioning takes place, it depends on the terms of the plan which is being submitted for approval.
Did you want to say any more, or I'll invite the council to come back on that? Mr Fitzpatrick, Mr Finlay, one, I suppose, are you content with the explanations, and two, in terms of Mr Trunick's suggested amendment to the text, any comments on that?
Happy with both of those, thanks.
Nothing else? Right, okay, that's fine. Let's move on to the next bullet then. Why should the details outlined... sorry, I should check. So, at the moment, I'm being referred to two different columns, so I need to know which is... Let me make sure I'm asking the correct question. There have been modifications in... No, that's not what I want to ask. The modifications in the first column, are they the ones upon which you both agree, or is it the case that both columns have been modified to respond to my questions and both of them separately represent your positions? Do you want to both say what's what so I can make sure I'm reading the document properly?
I think that's easy to clarify. So when I was suggesting that amendment, it was to the left column, but actually if you look at the right column, subparagraph 3, the same applies. So it's the same in both. That point is the same in both columns.
But in your view, should I be disregarding one of the columns? I suppose I'm asking you, given the discussions and agreements you've both come to in preparing this document, should I take one column over the other to be incorporating the modifications? Or alternatively, is it the case that you've both agreed a set of modifications, but you still have disagreements, and therefore I should read both columns to represent your respective positions, but each of them includes the correcting remarks, if you like?
No, so we want you to read the left column and take that column and ignore the third column. The reasons for that are that, in our view, it is quite unnecessary to include the level of detail in the third column at this stage. The decommissioning plan, if the decommissioning condition on the left column tells you what you have to do, you have to decommission the development, whether it's just the surface or underground, but it tells you what to do. How you do it will be in the scheme that you submit for approval. Trying to define the details of the scheme at this stage is hopeless. It will always be inclusive, and defining matters inclusively I think is a bad idea in a condition. You can be exclusive, in which case you have defined something, but if it's inclusive, something can always be added anyway, so why try?
So it's fair to say then your previous disagreements on the level of detail stand, but otherwise the corrections that have been made apply to your respective positions?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. And I'll invite the council to come back, because presumably, although Mr Trunick has just said he would like me to ignore the third column, if I've understood him correctly, you don't want me to ignore that?
Correct, yeah. I just wanted to advise that paragraphs 3 and 5 in the Highland Council's proposed condition should both read the DEMP.
And just let me make sure I'm on the right page. And that is as opposed to IDRP, I think. Is that correct? Okay. So when I'm reading the third column in the way that you would like me to, I can take it that the corrections have been made in that column and the document referencing. I'm pretty comfortable. I understand the distinction that Mr. Trunick makes between the point in time that the different document titles are used, and I don't think you were disagreeing with that, were you? No.
I wasn't disagreeing with that, and just check the right reference to the right document, as far as I'm aware, is being made in column 3 as well.
And on the matter of 12 months, you were content with the 12-month time frame?
I was, yes.
So again, to be clear, Mr. Trunick had said in his view it was correct that the point of dispute is the one of detail now, and is that in your view a correct understanding of matters?
Correct, yes.
And Mr. Trunick, I didn't misrepresent you there in my quoting to him. No, you're content with that. Okay, right. I think I understand much better now where things are. Right. Let's. If no one's got anything else they want to come back on those bits, we'll move on to the second bullet. No, okay. Yeah. Okay. So why should the details outlined in proposed condition 9, section 4? Realising, of course, that we've just started to touch on this. So. The details outlined in section 4 of the Council's wording A to I be included or not included. I think, Mr. Trunick, you've probably just answered that in your previous question, but I'll give you the chance to say more if you wish.
No, I've said it.
And did you want to respond to that, or did you feel you've already responded to that?
I just wanted to say that the Council sort of seeks absolute clarity as to what will be required, and that should provide guidance to the applicant and to the council officer in 30 years' time as to what will be and should be included in the decommissioning plan. We feel that the requirement meets the 6 tests, and also it's tied to the next condition, condition 10, for the financial guarantee, so that it helps to provide clarity for those costings as well.
Thank you. I think that's clear. Did you want to respond, Mr. Trunick?
Well, the trouble is, it isn't clear because of the wording at the bottom of page 9 in the third column. Shall include, but not limited to. That's my point. That it doesn't define or give clarity at all. It's a list of some of the things that might need to be included, but not all. Far better to leave the scheme to define itself.
In the event that the scheme was that the plan was to define itself in that way, and the condition was not to be specific in, I'll use the word topics, if you like, the topics to be covered, might that risk the need for lots of backwards and forwards and negotiation in the future? Would it be preferable to at least set out some of the expectations of the contents, even if it doesn't say you must do this or you must do that? The fact that you must address a particular matter, is that not reasonable?
I don't think it particularly helps. So no, if you're being told that this decommissioning must be, you must take away what's on the surface, you must take away 0.5 metres of the foundations, and you must do whatever you tell us to do about the access tracks, that's in dispute. Then what you submit in terms of how you do it, I think is perfectly well left to the later stage. It does not need to be defined now. I don't think there's any lack of clarity in that. There's no unfairness. And I come back to my point about being inclusive as opposed to exclusive. It doesn't really help you. It tells you some of the things the planning authority might want to see, but it's not exclusive.
And it's the exclusive nature of that that is the point. Is it your point that it's open-ended even if it specifies some things?
Yes, and also perhaps a more fundamental point that conditions can get awfully long, and I just think there's a merit here in just saying very quickly what it is you have to do, we submit a plan. I won't be here in 30 years' time, but this plan will be submitted for approval. If it contains the right things, it'll be approved. If not, the council will say what it wants to see. There is toing and froing anyway. I don't think that trying to plan ahead for every detail for what happens in 30 years' time is useful.
Okay. Did you want to respond to that, Mr. Fitzpatrick?
Nothing further to add.
Okay. Everybody all said and done on that one. Right. Okay. So let's move then to the final 3 bullet points, which kind of spill out from this. So again, some points of clarity here. Hopefully we should be able to run through these pretty quick. Whose is the text highlighted in red and crossed out in section 1 of proposed condition 10? So let me just take myself there. In the council's column of CD 1605, document page 14, I have a note here that says this wording has been deleted by the Highland Council next to section 1. So do I understand properly that that is your confirmation of an answer to this question?
Correct, yeah.
Mr. Trunick, I take it you're happy enough with that? Yep, okay. The next one, what is meant by the term in favour of the planning authority in the council's column also on CD 1605, page 14, so I think this is the same one. Do you want to just explain what's meant by that?
It means for the benefit of the council.
Could you just explain that a bit more? So the financial guarantee shall be maintained in favour of the planning authority or for the benefit of the planning authority until the date of completion of all decommissioned restoration and aftercare and obligations. So can you just talk me through to make sure I just want to understand the wording properly to make sure I understand what you're meaning by that. Does it mean that the money in the financial guarantee would be given to the authority in order to undertake the works in the event that it was needed in the first place?
That's exactly what it means, yeah. And so that the council isn't, in effect, out of pocket.
Sorry, I've cut you off.
And so that the council isn't, in effect, out of pocket for completing the works in whatever event that could turn out to be.
No, that's helpful. I had a suspicion it was along those lines, but I wanted to be sure. Thank you. And then proposed condition 10, yes, what is it that needs to be reviewed every 5 years? I might have been wrong about my understanding of what the nature of the dispute was. Is the thing that gets reviewed every 5 years the IDRP or the cost of implementing it? What was your view of that, Mr. Fitzpatrick?
It's the cost of implementing the IDRP, and that's why clarity at an early stage is required, because this will ensure that the costings agreed to in the financial guarantee are as close as to what can reasonably be known at an early stage of the development.
Okay, it may have been that I'd misread, I think, what you originally said. Mr. Trunick, did that reflect your own understanding of matters?
Yes, it does. I mean, it's the cost of decommissioning, not the cost of the IDRP. But may I make a more general point on?
Yes.
There's not much between us on this condition, but the reason that perhaps we don't like the third column in favour of is that in the left column what we said is financial provision. Now, financial provision might be in the form of a bond or a guarantee. It might be in something else which wouldn't be in favour of the planning authority, but more in the nature of a general insurance policy. But I don't think it's appropriate to try and tie down the detail of the financial provision too much at this stage. There are lots of ways of doing it. So is that an argument about what financial product comes from this condition and who is the beneficiary of that financial product? The point I make is that there may be a mixture of even a cash deposit, there may be an insurance policy, there may be a bond, there may be a guarantee, a parent company guarantee, maybe all sorts of things. What form it takes, we don't know this far in advance. I may have understood things, and in a moment the council will be able to come back and tell me if I've misunderstood it or whether I'm misrepresenting them. But from his answer, I understood the in favour of the council bit simply to mean
and I'm happy to be told I'm wrong, the council will be the recipient of whatever benefit it is from whatever financial product it is in the event of that needing to be invoked, and therefore are these not two separate? Are these not two distinct things? If I've understood you correctly, you're talking about what the product is, and the council is saying, and I may be wrong, they didn't appear to be saying they minded what product it was. They appeared to be saying they wanted to be the beneficiary of it. Have I understood matters?
Not quite so, no. In the third column, subparagraph 3 actually says the financial guarantee shall be maintained in the favour of the planning authority. That is very specific. We do not.
So it's the financial guarantee bit that is the. Well, I realise the in benefit of in favour of the council, but it was. Sorry, you go.
I'm not that type of lawyer, I'm afraid. I understand planning. I don't understand this sort of thing at all. But what I do know is that there are various forms of decommissioning provision, and they're not necessarily in the form of a guarantee. They're not necessarily in the form of an instrument which declares anyone to be the beneficiary. That's all I know. Don't ask me more because I haven't got any answers.
Okay. Mr. Fitzpatrick and Mr. Finley, you're studying things. Do you want a moment? Yeah. All right. That's fine. We'll just take a couple of minutes for you to confer.
So just about that, if you look at paragraphs 1 and 2, I mean, those are basically fine because it says until...
These are the council's paragraphs 1 and 2.
Yep. Until a bond or other form of financial guarantee in terms reasonably acceptable. Those are two forms and maybe others. Paragraph 2 is all right. Value of the financial provision, reverting to the word provision. It's 3 and 4 which specifically refer to a guarantee that I have a problem with.
Okay, that's clear. Do you want to come back?
That's helpful. I understand. The wording in 3 or 4 could refer to the bond or other form of financial guarantee or other form of financial provision.
That'd be fine.
Yeah. I think the important point is whichever financial provision it's maintained in favour of the council.
That's okay.
So I understand the point. You can have different forms of financial provision which may be acceptable to the council, not just bonds. And because paragraph 1 gives the council the say-so as to what is acceptable, and all the other paragraphs follow on from that, if the financial provision that is, in fact, it's better the bond or other form of financial guarantee is acceptable to the council under 1, then the same thing, whatever it is, bond, financial guarantee, company guarantee, will be accepted to the council in all the other provisions.
Right, I think I understand that. And the words I'd written down that you said to me were bond or other form of financial provision. Was that? Did I write that down correctly?
I think I prefer to be other form of financial guarantee because that's the wording in paragraph 1.
That's okay because there are lots of forms of guarantee.
Yeah.
It could be in lots of forms. So I'm happy with that wording.
I think what I'd really welcome is if you can both make a point of covering that matter in your closing submissions, so that we've got some. So that I think I've written it down properly, but I'd really like to see it from each of you in your closing submissions, so that we can be clear in the event that I need to. I will want to at least explain this matter for Scottish ministers in a succinct enough way that makes sure I'm not getting anything wrong that either of you have agreed to across the table, at least.
I think so. That's fine. There's really nothing between us. It's just a matter of wording. We can work it out.
Thank you for that. And yeah, if you can include that in closing submissions, that would be extremely helpful. Thank you. I think that takes us to the end of item 3 then. Any more on that? Were there any more remarks? No? Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Right, let's move on to item 4, proposed condition 12, construction environmental management plan, CEMP. Now, I think this is again one of those parts of Let me get myself to the right page. This is, I think, one of the parts of the modified material. I'll read this first. I'll then cover CD 16.6 and I'll bring in the parties. So what uncertainty, the applicant's words on CD 1605, document page 18, would be introduced by the Council's preferred wording. What is meant by the term pH-rich water and pH-rich wastewater and substances in relation to some of the detail proposed by the Council for proposed condition 12.b on 16.005, document page 19, and who has crossed out some of the red text in the council column on CD 1605, document pages 20 and 21, and what is the rationale for doing so. Subsequent to me obviously issuing the agenda, I now have in 1606 highlighted in yellow writing on page 18 for me, it says in capital letters, the condition in this column is agreed, and that is in the third column, which is Highland Council's column. So I believe I can take from that that everything that is written in that is your jointly agreed position. That may well deal with the matters that are in my 3 bullets, but what I really like is for us to address those as we go through. So if we can take them one by one, I'll go to the applicant for the first one, and if you can just either confirm or dispute what I've just made assumptions about to you and deal with that matter, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
So with your permission, I don't want to go back into the history of what might have been uncertain, because it has now been covered by the agreed condition, and I don't see we need to I will discuss it if you want, but I don't see we need to. The term pH has come out, and I think it was Highland Council who deleted the red text. So those are the answers to your questions, but the main thing is we have agreed the condition.
First of all, I'll invite you back, and as I do as well, can I just draw your attention to something I noticed while I was reading through at lunchtime in point S? You appear to have deleted the words pollution prevention plan. And I just wanted to check whether the provisions of what might be included in something of that nature are included somewhere else, or whether you don't think they're necessary. So I'm happy for you to respond to Mr. Trinick's points, cover the matters here and deal with that one as well.
No, I agree with Mr. Trinick. It was just those matters of clarity. We've deleted a point R, the non-crossed out wording is preferred. My English is good, thank you. For point S...
Sorry, could you... So that I understand, in point R...
Yeah,
the red writing that does not have lines through it is what you both agree.
It is, yeah.
It is, right, okay. So I can ignore the stuff that's crossed out in point R.
Please do.
Right, understood.
And just for another point of clarity, S, the pollution prevention plan, has been crossed out because it's already requested in point E with further specifics of what the pollution prevention plan should include.
Thank you. That's helpful to have that clarity. Okay, you're otherwise content on everything else, because I think yes, the matters are dealt with. Any further remarks? No, all good. Right. Let's now, for those following at home, item 5 was the proposed condition on noise. Earlier in the week, both parties had reached agreement on the matters in dispute and had provided me with answers to the questions that are set out in this agenda, so I'm not going to read them. That has been submitted and I have got that. And in CD 16.6, proposed condition 22, it says in yellow letters, update 26th of March 2024, condition amended per joint statement submitted 25th of March 2024, condition agreed. And there is now one column, which is the first column, which contains the only wording, which goes on for several pages. And then in an appendix or annex at the back, there are also some tables which contain numbering and various other provisions which relate to this condition. That is my understanding. Do you want to clarify matters, Mr. Trinick?
No clarification, sir. It's all very clear. I make a request, though, that when you report to the ministers, this condition should be the last one on the table and immediately above the tables of values. I think it makes much easier reading if the wording of the condition flows onto the tables.
Yes, so this is a sequencing request that you're making of me there, and I understand that to be, yes, as you say, because there will be a series of provisions about noise, and then there will be another part of the document which is immediately following, which has those bits in it. I understand, I think, why you're asking me that. Did you want to say anything, Councillor?
Just one of your points, queries, does the Highland Wide Local Development Plan or any other part of development, I don't know if you received any other document, if you received a written statement?
The statement that I think was jointly submitted on the 25th, which is referenced here, I seem to recall that dealing with that matter because I think you made reference to
the relevant noise, was it? Sorry.
I think, sorry, yes, I think you made reference to the development plan, but you also made reference to another document. My apologies, I don't have the statement in front of me, but I do recall that it made reference to that. If you've got it in front of you, I'm happy for you to kind of turn it up if you want and tell me about it, and I'm sure Mr. Trunick and his colleagues may well want to do the same.
It was really just to clarify that the question is contain noise limits lower than ETSU. The actual answer is no. But the ETSU is referenced in those documents.
Certainly, with you just reminding me of that point, that is, I think, what I recall reading. Did you want to respond, Mr. Trunick?
Nothing to add, so no, I agree.
Okay, thank you all. That's fine. We'll move on from noise then, recognising the points that have been made. This takes us to item 6, other condition queries. And again, I'm aware that some matters have been dealt with in 1606, but I'll read the points first and then we can go and deal with them. So the first one is Council Report of Handling, 14th of June 2023, CD 42. Paragraph 10.74 seeks a detailed written scheme of investigation in relation to archaeology that would be secured by condition. And my questions were, where, if anywhere, is this covered by the proposed conditions in CD 1605? And if it is not covered in 1605, does the Council still seek it? And if it does, what wording ought to be used for such a condition? And if not, what is the reason for this? I have seen in my reading over lunch, I think page 56, of CD 16, yes, page 56 of CD 16.006 contains an additional proposed condition 35. It says in the yellow text, update 26th of March 2024, additional proposed by THC, agreed by applicants, subject to amendments shown in track changes, and there is a condition there in the Highland Council's column. I think I'll invite the Council just to just respond first and to explain to me what it understands by crossings out and underlinings, just so I make sure I'm understanding any dispute that might exist. Over to you.
Just to confirm, it was an oversight, and that we've agreed on that wording as said in column 4. No development other than permitted preliminary works, because the preliminary works are set out in the box below at the end of this document.
So, was it you that crossed out the or work including site clearance, or was it the applicant? And if it was the applicant, are you happy with it being crossed out, or would you prefer it to remain?
It was the applicant, but I have no major concerns with that.
Okay, did you want to say anything else before I invite the applicant?
No, that's everything. Thank you.
Mr. Trunick.
Nothing to add, sir.
Okay, thank you. That's clear. I understand that. And then that moves us on to the final part of this agenda, although you'll be pleased to know there's a couple of additional queries I've got, having read this. So, final item on the agenda then. Council's Report of Handling, 14th of June 2023, CD 4.2, paragraph 10.47, seeks a condition to ensure appropriate access, junction designs and works for proposed access off the A836. The reporter notes that the Council agrees with the wording for proposed condition 13, Construction Transport Management Plan, so that wasn't in dispute, which at section 2.d, and that was on CD 16.005, page 22, appears to include this matter within and or as part of the CTMP. And if I've understood correctly, Mr. Fitzpatrick, that is still the case in CD 1606, but I think you may have had a rewrite, and I'd just welcome some explanation of that when I can find the page. Sorry, I found the page now, and it says, yes, the condition is agreed. That's the condition as written in the Highland Council's column. The yellow writing says, update 26th of March 2024. THC have added paragraph E. My apologies, this is the addition, relating to site access. The condition as proposed in column 3 is agreed. So Part E is in bold text on this. So you are saying this is a satisfactory mechanism to achieve the appropriate designs in your view?
Yes, it's just to make it clear that we want fully dimensioned drawings, basically, and just to ensure that it's the site access and not any other access along the route. So thank you for bringing that to our attention.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Tronick, did you want to respond?
No, sir, we're happy with that.
Understood, thank you. Okay, right, just a couple of additional matters that came up. I think just one, in report of handling, paragraph 10.51, you talk about a recreational access management plan, and I think somewhere else you also refer to an outdoor access management plan. I think the conditions refer to an I've moved all my pages, so I can't find the appropriate condition, but there's a slightly different title.
Number 30 on page 51.
Condition 30, thank you. Yes, so on condition 30, the reference is made to outdoor access plan. And my question is quite a simple one. Is a recreational access management plan, an outdoor access management plan, and an outdoor access plan, are they the same thing? Or at least similar enough that the condition is covering the matters you previously called something else?
Yes, my awareness is that the terms are interchangeable.
Thank you, that's helpful. Mr. Strunick. Okay. Is there anything else in 1606 that you wanted to highlight to me, either party?
Not really, sir. You'll note that some conditions are still not agreed, but there's also text explaining why. And since you're simply here to gather information from us, and if you wanted more, you would have asked.
Mr. Fitzpatrick, did you have a view on that?
I agree with Mr. Trinick.
That's helpful. I thought I'd give you both the opportunity to do that. I have had a limited amount of time to read it, so I've read and digested as much as I can. I would hope that I don't need to ask further questions about it. If it turns out that I suddenly come across something, then I'll just have to write to you and ask. But I'm hopeful that that won't be necessary. That brings us to and before I finish that, did anybody have any more points before we kind of finish the agenda? Did the applicant want to make any remark on that basis? No?
No, thanks, sir. That was very helpful.
Okay, no problems. That concludes hearing session 2 on draft conditions. Thank you all for that. There's a number of matters that I just need to run through and check, so just while I find my notes for those. One is to do with site access, and I don't mean site access in planning terms, I mean going on site. The applicant, at my request some time ago, provided me with some details of how I can get onto the site. It's my intention to visit the site when I come and do my site inspection. I have recollection that you had asked if I could give notice of about a week ahead, just so that people know that I might be on site. So my question is, do you need me to name a particular date or time so people know that I'm on site on that particular day? I realise you've given me the access details, but is that something you need me to do?
No.
So should I take it from that I can turn up at my leisure? Do I need to report to anybody or anything like that?
No, I can give the landowners the details of when you'll be there.
That's fine. I'll advise you in due course then. It is likely it will be the week after next, but I'll make a point of advising you just so that they know someone will be on. If you need me to name a day, I can try and pick a day. But if it's acceptable to say I'll be there on one of the days in the week, then I can do that.
That would be fine. Yeah.
Okay, understood. Thank you for that. Okay, so that concludes all inquiry and hearing sessions for this public inquiry. And for clarity for anybody who's watching, we had dedicated Thursday, 28th of March, as a possible date over which these proceedings might need to they might need to use that day. However, we have now concluded everything, so there will be no sessions tomorrow. All sessions in this inquiry are now concluded. In a few moments' time, I will formally close the public inquiry, and before I do that, I need to run through several procedural matters, and when I finish, I'll ask the council and then the applicant if they've got any remarks that they want to make before I close, or any matters for my attention. And that brings me to closing statements and summaries of case. Excuse me. It was agreed at the PEM that the council would submit its closing statements and summaries of case no later than the end of 19th of April 2024, and the applicant will then be invited to submit its closing statement and summary of case by no later than the end of the 7th of May 2024. The difference between those dates, there's a number of public holidays, as I think everybody appreciates, so normally the timing is a little bit shorter than that, but that was to account for those and I think some of the Easter break. After those have been received, I will be preparing my report for Scottish Ministers. Obviously, I can't advise you on the exact timescale of that because I'm yet to write it. And once I've completed my report, its recommendations will be passed to Scottish Ministers. It will then be for them, Scottish Ministers, to determine the application. I cannot give you a timescale for when that would be, and you will be advised in due course when that decision is taken. I need to say some important thank yous before I close. Firstly, a thank you to all of the participants and witnesses. That's been extremely helpful. Thank you for your time and your efforts over the recent days. That has helped me enormously. Thank you to the applicant and council for their cooperation in assembling documents and making them available to people. That's been extremely useful. Thank you to Rothall Community Hall for hosting us. It's been a very good venue for us to hold something like this. And I need to thank Claire Seidel, the DPA case officer, and David Spears, who's sitting behind me with the IT skills for running the events. These things don't happen on their own. They're arranged and organised by people, and it's them who've done that. So my thanks to them. And thank you to all who took part and opted to follow the proceedings online or in person. I'm very grateful. Are there any matters for my attention before I close, Mr. Finlay? No,
no, sir.
No.
No, sir, just to thank you for accommodating the various timetable changes, and to the applicants for kindly sharing their tea, coffee and biscuits with us. Much appreciated.
Mr. Trilling, anything else? No?
So thank you for everything.
No problem. Thank you all. Well, wishing everybody a safe onward journey then, I now formally close this public inquiry. Good afternoon.